Hello everyone. Tonight I'll tell you a horror story. November 2004, Portland, Oregon. The rain had been falling for hours, tracing thin silver lines across dark windows. Street lamps flickered weakly, illuminating puddles that reflected only fragments of reality. The main character, Daniel Harris, 27 years old, a delivery driver who often worked late shifts across the interstate highways. In his pocket he carried a small notebook where he wrote fragmented dreams, half-songs, and fleeting thoughts he never shared with anyone. His hope was simple: save enough money to leave the city, travel south, and begin again. That dream, however, would soon dissolve into something colder, darker, and irreversible. Before we begin, if you enjoy horror stories like this, hit like and subscribe. And let me know in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? It's amazing to see people around the world sharing this moment together. Now, in just a few seconds, your screen will begin to dim. That's not a glitch. It's designed to protect your eyes from blue light. When your screen dims, your brain will understand it's time to unwind. So, turn off the lights. Let the fan hum softly. Put your headphones on. Let's begin. The first documented sighting came on a deserted stretch of US Route 26. Daniel had been assigned a night delivery that required him to cross a span of forest road where thick pines leaned into the asphalt as if listening. The rain grew heavier. His windshield wipers beat a frantic rhythm against the glass. Then, in the glare of his headlights, a figure appeared motionless, centered in the lane. Daniel's foot slammed the brake pedal. Tires shrieked, rubber burning against wet pavement. The vehicle slid, shuddered, and halted only a few feet away. The figure remained. It was not human in any ordinary sense. Its outline was tall, distorted with limbs too long, and posture slightly bent, as though gravity had stitched it incorrectly. The road behind it was empty, no car, no signal, no residence within several miles. Daniel's breath fogged the interior. He reached instinctively for the horn, pressing once. The sound fractured the night, echoing into the trees. The figure did not move. The engine ticked softly as if cooling. Daniel blinked, and in that fraction of a second, the figure was gone, vanished completely from the lane ahead. Only rain remained, falling heavy across asphalt. A shiver rolled down his back. He restarted the vehicle, pressed the accelerator slowly, eyes locked on the road that now seemed endless. Yet in the rearview mirror, a shadow clung faintly to the reflection, as though seated in the cargo hold watching. He gripped the steering wheel tighter. Mile markers passed numbers, dissolving into water streaks. Daniel whispered to himself, steadying his breath, reminding his mind of rational explanations. Fatigue, exhaustion, tricks of headlights and rain. But deep inside, another voice insisted something had crossed into his path, a presence that did not belong on any highway map. By the time he reached the delivery point, a warehouse illuminated by yellow halogen lamps, Daniel's pulse had slowed only slightly. He unloaded the cargo, signed the papers with trembling hands, and drove back toward the city. Yet he knew already that silence would not last. What had stood on the road might return, perhaps closer, perhaps inside the walls of his own life. That night, when he opened his notebook, Daniel could not write. Pages remained blank, untouched, as though even ink refused to describe what his eyes had seen. He turned off the light, closed his eyes, but the image repeated behind his eyelids, a figure distorted, unbending, waiting. And when he finally slept, he heard something within the rain, a faint disturbance in the silence, as if long limbs scraped across the roof above his bed. He awoke suddenly, heart racing, sure that something had followed him back from that highway stretch, and in the corner of his room there was movement where no light reached. Daniel spent the next morning convincing himself the night had been an accident of perception. Coffee brewed in the small kitchen of his apartment, the bitter scent filling the air. Outside, clouds pressed low heavy with another storm. He checked his notebook again, hoping words might come. Nothing. Pages seemed resistant, a weight pressing them closed. He left for work earlier than usual, anxious to occupy his mind with routine. On the interstate, daylight made the forest appear calmer, almost ordinary. Pine branches swayed with the wind, raindrops sliding from needle tips. Traffic was sparse. Daniel forced the radio on, catching fragments of a morning show. Laughter, advertisements, weather reports, all sounded distant, tinny, like they came through water. He turned the volume higher, but the signal cracked until words dissolved into static. He turned it off. Silence filled the cab again. At the distribution center, colleagues noticed his distraction. "Rough night?" someone asked. Daniel nodded without explanation. He could not describe the figure without sounding unwell. He avoided their eyes, finished loading, and prepared for another long delivery into the mountain passes. As miles passed, tension returned. He felt it in the rearview mirror in the way headlights of other cars seemed to vanish too quickly once overtaken. The rain returned heavier now, slamming against the windshield with relentless rhythm. Daniel leaned forward, scanning every corner of the road. The figure had not been a nightmare. It had been real. He could still sense it. Near mile marker 71, an old service station stood abandoned, its windows broken, pumps rusted and useless. Daniel slowed instinctively, glancing at it. For just a second, behind fractured glass, he saw movement, tall, bent, shadow-colored. His foot pressed the accelerator harder, propelling the truck forward. By evening, fog layered the valleys, reducing visibility to only a few car lengths. Daniel reduced speed, hazard lights flashing. He checked the mirrors, every reflection sharper than it should be. At one point, he caught sight of a shape running along the tree line, matching his pace. Long limbs extended, stride unnatural, blurred by fog, but unmistakably real. He refused to slow further. When he reached the next way station, Daniel parked and stepped out. The air carried a smell of wet soil and old fuel. He walked quickly toward the lit office, paperwork in hand. His boots splashed shallow puddles. Then he froze. Behind him in the semi's reflective surface, he saw it again, an elongated form leaning close where no one should stand. He turned sharply. Nothing. The lot was empty, only rain falling steadily. An officer inside the station greeted him with routine questions. Daniel answered, voice unsteady. The officer paused, eyes narrowing. "You look pale," he remarked. Daniel forced a weak laugh, muttered about lack of sleep. Paperwork with stamped signatures completed. He returned to his truck, climbing inside with hands trembling harder than before. Back on the road, the presence seemed to grow heavier. Every shadow along the roadside appeared alive, every bend in the trees suggested surveillance. Daniel gripped the wheel until his knuckles whitened. The clock read 10:47 p.m. The highway stretched dark, lined by fog that moved like slow breath. He blinked hard, tried to steady his nerves. When his eyes opened again, the figure was in the lane ahead. Not far this time, closer. Its head nearly brushing low branches, limbs hanging at angles no human could survive. Daniel gasped, pressed the brake, heart pounding. Tires skidded, the semi shook fishtailed, and for a moment he thought it might tip. The figure did not move aside. In the instant of impact, the headlights flickered violently. Daniel braced, waiting for collision. Yet the truck passed through nothing but air. The wheel jerked violently in his hands as if something had resisted unseen mass, colliding without form. The vehicle stabilized, engine roaring angrily. Daniel looked into the mirror again. This time the figure was not behind, not on the road, not among trees. It was inside the cab, seated silently in the passenger seat. Rain drummed harder against the glass, masking every sound except his own heartbeat. Daniel did not dare turn his head, but in his peripheral vision, he saw its form bent awkwardly, watching him with faceless intent. And then it whispered soft, wet words carried in a voice like shifting leaves. He could not understand the meaning, but the sound crawled beneath his skin. Daniel's knuckles whitened on the wheel. He fixed his eyes forward, afraid to acknowledge what sat inches away. The cab felt smaller, air dense with dampness. Every breath carried the metallic tang of condensation. The whispering stopped, replaced by silence that weighed heavier than sound. He could sense its posture, bent limbs folded in a way bones should never allow. He reached toward the radio, desperate for distraction. His fingers brushed the dial, but the speakers erupted with static the moment he touched it. Not random, static, rhythmic pulsing, like distorted breathing, pressed through broken equipment. He yanked his hand back. The figure shifted slightly, and the seat creaked under pressure, though nothing visible rested fully upon it. Miles blurred past. Daniel dared a glance to the right. The passenger seat appeared empty, only torn fabric and stains from old deliveries. Yet when he looked into the windshield's faint reflection, he saw it seated, hunched, unmoving. Reflections showed what eyes could not. He swallowed hard, throat dry, and forced his gaze back to the asphalt. The road narrowed through a canyon. Walls of rock rose steeply on either side. Fog pooled near the ground like heavy breath trapped between stone ribs. Daniel slowed to 30, hazard lights still flashing. The sensation in the cab grew oppressive. Without warning, the headlights cut out. Darkness slammed into the cab. The engine continued running, tires rolling, but illumination was gone. Daniel cursed loudly, flicking switches, slamming the high beam control. Nothing. He strained his eyes, making out only faint outlines of canyon walls. The mirror revealed nothing, except in a brief shimmer, a taller shape filling the passenger seat fully. His heart hammered. Then the headlights returned on their own, blazing harsh white against wet rock. The road was clear. Nothing stood in his way. The sudden brightness blinded him, forcing his eyes to adjust painfully. He inhaled sharply, pulse still rapid. He drove another hour before reaching a truck stop. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, illuminating rows of parked semis. Relief washed over him at the sight of people inside the diner, casual and oblivious. He parked, shut the engine off, and sat still waiting. Silence filled the cab. No whisper, no pressure in the air. The passenger seat empty again. Daniel stepped out. Rain tapped lightly on his jacket as he walked inside. Coffee, fries, the sound of country music bleeding from a jukebox, ordinary life. He forced himself to eat, to breathe. But when he rose to pay, his reflection in the window betrayed him. Behind his own shape, seated at the booth he had just vacated, the figure lingered. Bent, silent, watching. He left money on the counter and walked out without another word. The lot felt colder now. As he climbed back into his truck, headlights of other vehicles flicked in and out of the fog. He turned his ignition, engine rumbling alive, but before shifting into gear, he noticed moisture spreading across the passenger side glass from inside. Lines of condensation, as though something exhaled too close. Daniel's chest tightened. He pulled onto the highway again, desperate to reach Portland before dawn. The notebook in his pocket pressed against his ribs, heavier than paper should feel. He considered pulling it out, recording every detail, but he feared acknowledgement would bind the thing closer. So he drove, eyes wide, body rigid, until city lights finally emerged. His apartment welcomed him with silence. He locked the door twice, dropped his jacket, and collapsed onto the bed without changing clothes. Exhaustion won, quickly, dragging him into uneasy sleep. In dreams, he stood on the highway again, rain crashing against asphalt, headlights flickering. The figure approached, each step bending reality. When it reached him, its limbs stretched overhead like branches ready to tear through sky. Daniel awoke at dawn, heart racing. He swore he heard something wet scrape across the hallway outside his apartment. He pressed his ear to the door. Silence. Then a faint creak, as though long fingers dragged against painted wood. He stepped back, afraid to unlock it. Light filtered weakly through curtains, but shadows seemed thicker than normal, clinging unnaturally to corners. His notebook lay on the table. For the first time since the encounter, words appeared on its open page. He had not written them. Ink smeared across paper read, "You brought me here." Daniel did not leave the apartment that day. He sat by the table, notebook open, staring at the words that did not belong to him. The ink shimmered faintly, as though it had only just dried. He touched the letters with his fingertip. The page felt cold, surface, damp, as if traced by rainwater. He pulled his hand back quickly, wiping moisture against his jeans. Outside, the storm continued, wind shaking the windows with restless pressure. Every creak in the hallway made his muscles tighten. Footsteps echoed at irregular intervals, too slow to be neighbors, too heavy to belong inside a modern apartment building. Daniel pressed his back against the wall, listening. Silence always followed, but it never reassured him. His breath fogged faintly in the air, despite the heating unit running steadily. By afternoon, exhaustion forced him to lie down. He left the notebook closed, but it pulsed in his thoughts like a heartbeat. He dreamed of corridors that stretched impossibly long, lined with doors that led nowhere. At the far end, the figure waited, limbs bent, face obscured. Every time he stepped forward, doors slammed shut behind him, sealing him deeper inside. He woke, gasping, the sound of a disturbance in the silence still echoing in his ears. The apartment lights flickered once. He reached for his phone, 3:12 p.m. A message appeared on the lock screen. Opened the door. No sender, no notification history when he checked again. Only blank emptiness. Uneasy, he decided to leave. He stuffed the notebook into his backpack, grabbed keys, and stepped into the hallway. It smelled faintly of mildew, though maintenance had cleaned weeks earlier. The elevator groaned, descending slowly, doors screeching when they parted. He pressed himself against the back wall of the car, watching each floor tick downward. For a moment, the lights dimmed, leaving only his reflection in the steel doors. Yet behind his own shape, taller and bent, another form flickered. When the doors opened at ground level, Daniel rushed outside into the rain. Streets gleamed, headlights reflecting sharp against wet pavement. He walked fast, choosing crowded routes, hoping presence of others would dilute the weight pressing against him. Yet people passed without noticing his frantic expression, their umbrellas shielding them from both storm and the unseen. Inside a small bookstore near downtown, he lingered among shelves, hands trembling as he flipped through old folklore volumes. Titles referenced shadow figures, phantoms, travelers who vanished along highways. Accounts stretched back decades, sometimes centuries. He found one paragraph that made his chest tighten. Entities of the roadside appear to lone travelers, attaching themselves until the journey ends in silence. He closed the book quickly, feeling watched even in that quiet store. The clerk at the counter gave him a polite nod, unaware of Daniel's internal collapse. He paid for the book, hurried into the rain again, and carried it pressed against his chest. Back in his apartment, night had fallen. Streetlights painted thin golden stripes across curtains. Daniel sat with the book open, scanning each page. Descriptions repeated in different cultures, elongated limbs, distorted posture, silence heavier than sound. Some accounts noted that writing about the figure invited it closer, binding presence to language. He glanced toward his own notebook, now resting on the table like bait. Suddenly, a knock at the door. 3 sharp raps. Daniel froze. His clock read 11:06 p.m. He approached slowly, pressing his eye to the peephole. The hallway stood empty. No footsteps, no shadows. Then, without sound, the notebook on the table opened on its own. Pages fluttered, though no wind touched them. Words etched across fresh paper, ink rising like veins beneath skin. "You can't ignore me." Daniel staggered back, knocking over a chair. The lights flickered again, longer this time. In the dim glow, corners of the room thickened into shapes that did not belong. He grabbed the notebook, shoved it deep into his backpack, and locked the door again. His breath came in short bursts, the air colder now. From the hallway, a new sound, slow dragging like limbs scraping along painted plaster. Daniel pressed his palms against his ears, but the sound persisted inside his skull. The door handle rattled once, then stilled. Silence returned, heavier than before. He crawled into bed, clutching the book of folklore, and forced himself not to sleep. But exhaustion conquered him eventually. In the last blur of consciousness, he saw the figure standing at the end of his bed, motionless, bent, waiting. When he woke, his shoes were soaked, streaks of wet soil across the floor, leading from the door to his bed. The trail of wet soil ended near Daniel's nightstand, where the carpet absorbed darkness like a wound. He crouched, touched the damp fibers, and pulled his hand back quickly. The moisture was cold, smelling faintly of earth and something metallic. He stared at his own fingertips, trembling. There had been no rain inside, no possible way for footprints to lead directly to his bed. He searched the apartment for signs of intrusion. Windows locked, doors still secured by chain, yet the evidence remained soil moisture and the impression that someone or something had crossed the threshold. His chest tightened. He pulled the folklore book closer, scanning again. A line caught his attention. When invited across the threshold, the shadow remains until the host is undone. Daniel had not invited anything, unless writing, dreaming, or fearing counted as invitation. He sat heavily on the couch, head in hands. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Against instinct, he answered. Static filled the line. Then a voice, wet and uneven, whispered, "You brought me here." Daniel's hand shook, ending the call instantly. He checked recent calls, no record, only silence. By evening, he decided to leave the apartment. He packed essentials, notebook and folklore book included, and drove to a motel on the edge of town. Neon lights flickered above the office, humming faintly. The clerk handed him a key with indifference, barely lifting eyes from a magazine. Daniel climbed the narrow staircase, entered the room, and locked the door behind him. Inside, curtains drawn, television on low to provide company, he sat at the desk. The notebook pulsed in his backpack, demanding attention. Against every instinct, he opened it. Pages flipped rapidly on their own, stopping midway. Fresh ink bled through letters, scrawled, "I am closer." Daniel slammed it shut. The television screen flickered, picture dissolving into static. A disturbance in the silence erupted from the speaker, high-pitched scraping. He turned it off quickly, but the sound lingered faintly in the room itself, as though static had leaked into the air. Sleep came reluctantly. He dreamed of corridors again, but this time doors opened instead of closing. Behind each door waited landscapes, forests, drenched in fog, highways without end, fields of soil stretching beneath heavy skies. At the center of all the figures stood, hand extended. Daniel woke, gasping, sweat cold on his skin. The motel clock read 3:33 a.m. From the corner of the room came movement. Shadows stretched unnaturally, bending away from light. Daniel sat frozen, unable to move. The shadow lengthened across the carpet, reaching toward his bed. He scrambled backward, pressed against the headboard, heart pounding so loudly it drowned the rain outside. The air grew colder, his breath formed mist. Slowly a sound joined the silence, a wet dragging each second closer. Daniel grabbed the folklore book, clutching it like a shield. Pages rustled, though no wind blew. Then just above the noise, another whisper. "Why do you run?" The shadow receded, suddenly vanishing into the corner. Daniel gasped for air, chest tight. Hours later, dawn filtered pale light through curtains, but fear remained etched in his body. He packed quickly and left the motel, unwilling to stay longer. Back in his truck, he drove aimlessly. Streets blurred into highways, highways into rural roads. He stopped at a diner by noon, ordered coffee he did not drink, and read further in the folklore book. Accounts varied but converged on one fact. Once the figure chose a traveler, it did not release them. Some entries suggested the only escape was to pass the burden onward intentionally or otherwise. Daniel felt sick. He closed the book, fingers trembling. Around him, life in the diner moved normally, voices, laughter, clatter of plates. Yet, in the window, reflection seated in the booth across from him. The bent figure appeared faintly, as though watching a companion. Daniel fled again, abandoning coffee book clutched tightly. He drove until gas ran low, stopping at a station along a deserted road. As he pumped fuel, he heard the sound of limbs dragging across gravel behind the building. He forced himself not to look, finished quickly, and pulled away. The rearview mirror betrayed him. In the truck bed reflection, it sat crouched, limbs folded unnaturally, eyes absent, presence undeniable. Daniel nearly veered off the road, heart hammering, throat tight. He gripped the wheel, whispering to himself, rationalizing, bargaining, pleading. Nothing changed. The figure remained. By nightfall, he returned reluctantly to his apartment. The soil trail had dried but left stains across the carpet. He dropped his bag, leaned against the wall, and listened. Silence pressed against him, thick, invasive. Then, from his notebook, a final line appeared in ink so dark it seemed carved. "Tomorrow I step fully inside." Daniel did not sleep the following night. The message from the notebook repeated in his mind until dawn. "Tomorrow I step fully inside." Each hour that passed pulled him closer to a moment he could not define, but dreaded with every nerve. He left every light on in the apartment television, buzzing faintly, heater blasting warm air that still failed to chase away the chill. By morning his eyes were bloodshot, hands shaking. He tried to leave for work, but the idea of highways, fog, and empty roads was unbearable. He called in, sick voice flat, offering no explanation. Hours dragged. He read passages in the folklore book again, searching for solutions. The entries grew darker, describing travelers who vanished without trace, their belongings found later, trucks abandoned, rooms sealed, notebooks filled with words no human hand admitted to writing. One passage chilled him deeper. When the threshold is crossed, silence replaces identity. The host becomes an echo, carrying the figure forward into other lives. Daniel slammed the book, shut bile rising in his throat. Afternoon turned stormy. Rain hammered the city relentlessly. Daniel sat by the window watching water streak down glass. In his reflection, the figure stood behind him. He turned quickly. Nothing there. He pressed a trembling hand against the pane. The cold seeped through his skin. By 7:00 p.m., power faltered. Lights dimmed, television died, heater shut off. Only faint city glow remained through the curtains. Daniel lit a candle, shadows stretching wildly across the walls. The notebook lay unopened on the table. Still pages rustled faintly as though stirred by unseen wind. The sound grew louder, fluttering, restless. Daniel stood, heart pounding, watching the cover tremble. Suddenly it flipped open. Ink bled onto paper in lines that spread too fast to be written by hand. Letters formed now. The candle flame bent sideways, though no draft touched it. A chill flooded the room. Daniel stumbled back against the wall. The notebook's pages flipped violently, words spilling across every surface. Overlapping messages repeated, "I step inside, I step inside, I step inside." Daniel covered his ears. The sound was not only visual, it echoed in his skull, whispers layered upon whispers. His vision blurred, walls bending, floor tilting. He tried to grab the book to throw it, but the moment his hands touched the cover, icy pain shot up his arms. The air thickened. Corners of the room twisted into forms, shadows, peeling away from surfaces. limbs stretched outward, bending, scraping across ceiling and floor. The figure manifested slowly, crawling out of shadow, like liquid pouring into form. Tall, bent, faceless, yet undeniably aware of him. Daniel's throat locked. He could not move. His heart hammered, lungs burned. The candle extinguished without touch. Darkness swallowed everything, except the outline of the figure, which now filled half the room. Limbs folding unnaturally, yet reaching still closer. A whisper scraped inside his ears. "You carried me home," Daniel screamed, but no sound left his throat, only a disturbance in the silence that echoed faintly, mocking him. He staggered backward, tripping over the couch, landing hard. The figure leaned closer, arm stretching impossibly long, fingers reaching toward his chest. Instinct overrode paralysis. Daniel grabbed the folklore book, holding it out like a shield. The figure froze, shadows recoiled slightly. He flipped the book open at random, words shaking under his trembling hands. One phrase caught his eye. "Containment is fleeting." But naming binds the shadow to the written page. His notebook still lay open, ink flowing across it. Daniel hurled the folklore book onto the notebook. Pages slammed shut together, a sound like thunder cracking inside the small room. The figure shrieked without voice, its form trembling violently, folding inward, collapsing into darkness. The room shook, glass rattled in frames. For a moment Daniel believed it was gone. Then silence returned, deeper than before. He crawled slowly toward the notebook, and folklore book fused together. Their covers pulsed faintly, heat radiating through fabric. He reached forward carefully. Suddenly, a new line etched itself across the outside cover. "Not bound. Shared." Daniel pulled his hand back, heart sinking. The figure was not trapped, it was multiplying. In the stillness, footsteps echoed from the hallway outside, slow, deliberate, impossibly long. They stopped directly at his door. Daniel pressed his back against the wall, eyes locked on the door. Footsteps had stopped directly outside, but the air still vibrated faintly, as though weight shifted slowly in the hallway. The silence thickened until he could hear only the rush of blood in his ears. His hand shook as he reached for the chain lock. He did not open it. Instead, he crouched low, crawling across the floor to extinguish any sign of movement. He waited, minutes stretched. Then the doorknob turned once, slowly, deliberately. The chain rattled but held firm. Daniel froze, lungs burning, refusing to exhale. The knob released silence, returning heavier than before. He remained crouched for nearly an hour, afraid to move. When he finally stood, his muscles trembled from strain. He approached the table, where both books remained sealed together, covers vibrating faintly, as if alive. Daniel touched them cautiously. Warmth pulsed through his fingertips like holding the skin of something breathing. The etched words, across the cover, "Not bound, shared," shifted slightly, letters stretching as though still forming. Daniel snatched his hand back, skin crawling. He wrapped both books tightly in a towel, shoved them into a drawer and locked it. For a moment he felt relief. By 3:00 a.m., exhaustion overtook him. He collapsed on the bed, eyes burning, yet rest refused to come. The walls seemed thinner, as if sound seeped from unseen rooms. He heard faint murmurs, overlapping voices, none clear, yet all speaking directly to him. He covered his ears, but the voices persisted, vibrating inside bone rather than air. A sudden crash pulled him upright. In the kitchen, every cabinet door hung open. Plates lay shattered across the floor, water dripping from the faucet, though he had not touched it. Daniel crept forward cautiously. The smell of damp earth filled the room. His socks soaked as he stepped into puddles that had formed beneath the sink. Yet no pipe leaked. The water carried streaks of soil spreading slowly across linoleum. Daniel grabbed his phone, intending to call anyone, but the screen flickered, camera activating on its own. The image displayed his own face, pale and trembling, framed by darkness. Then another form appeared behind him in the camera view, taller, bent, faceless. Daniel dropped the phone, the device cracking against the floor. The image blinked out. He stumbled back toward the living room, heart hammering. The notebook drawer rattled violently, as though something inside struggled to escape. The towel muffled nothing. Daniel considered throwing the books outside, abandoning them entirely, but a deeper instinct told him distance would not matter. The thing had already crossed into his life. The lights flickered, dimmed, then died. Only faint streak glow bled through the curtains. Daniel lit another candle flame, shaking wildly as though threatened by invisible breath. Shadows lengthened along the walls, stretching upward, bending unnaturally. One shadow peeled free entirely, moving independently, sliding across the ceiling with deliberate patience. Daniel whispered a prayer, though he had not prayed in years. The shadow paused above him, limbs folding inward like insect legs preparing to strike. Suddenly, a loud knock hammered the door again, 3 times, heavy, shaking the frame. Daniel spun toward it. Silence followed. When he turned back, the ceiling shadow was gone. He collapsed onto the couch, head in hands, his mind fractured between exhaustion and terror. He considered fleeing Portland, entirely driving until the tank ran dry, leaving everything behind. Yet he feared the figure would follow regardless, appearing on roads, diners, mirrors, motels. Escape meant nothing. The candles sputtered. For a moment, darkness swallowed the room. In that void, Daniel heard the whisper again, clearer than ever. "You are not alone anymore." The flame reignited without touch. Across the room, on the wall above the locked drawer, words appeared in dripping black streaks. "Others carry me too." Daniel's chest constricted. He realized with cold certainty that what haunted him was not singular. It was part of something larger, spread across countless lives, passed along highways, motels, books, reflections. He had not been chosen uniquely. He had simply been caught. A disturbance in the silence echoed from the hall again. This time it was not footsteps. It was breathing, slow, heavy, wet, pressed against the thin door separating him from the unseen. The breathing outside Daniel's door continued for minutes that felt like hours. Each exhale pressed through the wood, damp and uneven, as though lungs too large, strained within a body not built for them. Daniel backed away slowly, gripping the candle with both hands, flame trembling against the draft that should not exist. Then it stopped. The silence that followed felt worse, like a void replacing sound. Daniel remained frozen, unwilling to approach the door. He retreated to the bedroom, shoved a chair beneath the knob, and sat on the floor with his back against the wall. His eyelids burned from lack of rest, yet sleep pulled him under without permission. Dreams came again, vivid and invasive. He stood on an endless highway under a black sky, rain falling but never touching the ground. Cars passed driverless, their windows filled with blank faces. Ahead, the bent figure waited at the center, line arms spread wide, shadow stretching for miles. Its voice filled the entire dreamscape, whispering the same line again and again, shared. Daniel woke gasping, drenched in cold sweat. Morning light filtered weakly through blinds, gray and washed out. The chair remained beneath the door handle. He had not moved in the night yet. Soil streaks now marked the bedroom carpet, leading directly to where he sat. He scrambled to his feet, kicking the chair aside, heart hammering. The books in the drawer still pulsed, faintly muffled by wood, but the vibration seemed stronger. He paced the apartment, muttering to himself, desperate for rational explanations. He considered reaching out to someone, family, colleagues, even a stranger, but what words could describe this without sounding insane? "Something follows me, something bent, something that writes in my notebook." No one would believe him. Worse, speaking it aloud might spread it further. By noon, Daniel left the apartment. He drove without direction, ending on a coastal road where waves battered cliffs violently. He sat on the hood of his truck, watching gray water churn, wind cutting through his jacket. For the first time in days, he felt distance. The sea roared louder than whispers, yet even here reflection betrayed him. In the glass of the driver's side mirror, the figure stood at the edge of the cliff, behind him, unmoving. Daniel whipped around. Only wind and salt spray. When he looked back at the mirror, the figure had moved closer. He slammed the truck door, engine roaring, and sped down the coastal road. Heart raced as he checked mirrors repeatedly. Empty highway. Yet he felt weight in the passenger seat again, heavier than before, unseen but undeniable. He turned the radio on, desperate for sound. Static answered, pulsing in sync with his heartbeat. That night, Daniel stopped at another motel, this one older, isolated along the coast. The clerk handed him a real key, not electronic, and warned him that storms often knocked out power. Daniel muttered thanks and carried his bag upstairs. In the room, he set the books on the desk. For hours, he stared at them, unwilling to open, unwilling to destroy. At midnight, lightning split the sky, thunder rolling over the sea. The lamp flickered and died. Candlelight returned, shadows stretching across peeling wallpaper. The drawer rattled again, though he had not placed the books inside. Covers shifted on their own, a faint line etched across the folklore book. "You cannot contain me." Daniel backed away, shaking his head violently. He grabbed the candle, intending to flee the room entirely, but the door slammed shut before he touched it. Locks engaged without his hand. Behind him, the mirror above the dresser fogged over as if from breath. Words scrawled slowly across its surface. "You are part of us." Daniel wiped at the glass desperately, but letters remained carved into condensation deeper than moisture. His reflection blurred, replaced by something taller, bent faceless. The candle extinguished. Darkness swallowed everything. A sound filled the room, louder than storm, louder than thunder. A disturbance in the silence, echoing like countless voices overlapping in wet whispers. Daniel screamed, though his throat produced no sound, only more silence crashing against his ears. Then, in the pitch black, a single hand rested against his shoulder. Long fingers, damp, pressing gently at first, then tightening until his knees buckled. He collapsed to the floor, gasping, clawing at unseen pressure. When the candle flared back alive, the room stood empty. Only Daniel remained trembling on the carpet, soil streaks spreading outward from where he knelt. And on the bedspread, drawn in dark, wet lines, a new message: "Tomorrow you follow." Daniel did not leave the motel room until daylight forced its way through the curtains. He sat on the floor all night, knees pulled tight to his chest, eyes fixed on the bedspread, where the words remained dark and damp. "Tomorrow you follow." By morning, the message had dried into a stain, as though nothing unusual had occurred. Yet the smell of soil lingered in the air. He showered quickly, hoping the steam might wash away more than sweat. But when the mirror-fogged words appeared again without his hand, "You cannot delay." Daniel wiped at the glass until streaks blurred, his reflection chest heaving. He packed his bag in minutes, stuffed both books inside, and left the room without looking back. The motel clerk glanced up as Daniel returned the key. "Long night?" the man asked. Daniel forced a hollow smile, muttered something about insomnia, and hurried outside. Rain began again, heavier, a curtain drenching the lot. His truck felt like both refuge and prison. He drove aimlessly, hands clamped around the wheel. Hours passed. Coastal roads bled into forest highways. The same sensation grew heavier, the presence beside him unseen, yet filling the passenger seat. Daniel refused to look directly, but in every reflective surface, window glass, rearview mirror, its shape hovered, bent, waiting. At dusk, he pulled into a rest area. The parking lot was nearly empty, only one sedan at the far end. Daniel stepped out, stretching stiff muscles. The air was damp, heavy with pine scent. He walked toward the restroom, building fluorescent lights, flickering faintly inside. As he approached, the sedan's window rolled down halfway. For a moment, he thought someone might ask for help. Instead, he saw nothing but a reflection, his own face distorted, taller, elongated, bent. He turned sharply away, pulse racing. Inside the restroom, every sink dripped steadily. The mirror above them stretched grime across its surface. Daniel leaned close, splashing cold water on his face. When he looked up, his reflection was gone. The mirror showed only the tiled wall behind him. Then slowly, the bent figure emerged in glass, towering over where his image should have been. Daniel stumbled backward, colliding with a stall door. The stall creaked open. Inside, soil spread across the floor in a perfect circle. He bolted out of the building, gasping. Daniel ignored it, sprinted to his truck, and locked the doors. He sat, trembling headlights illuminating the rain-soaked road. The presence filled the cab again, undeniable. He drove without thought, desperate to outpace it, though he knew distance meant nothing. By nightfall, he found himself back in Portland, though he had no memory of choosing turns. His apartment building loomed windows, dark rain dripping from gutters. Against reason, he went inside. The hallway smelled stronger, now soil mold, damp stone. He reached his door. It stood unlocked. Daniel entered slowly, flicking the switch. Light filled the room, but not as he remembered. Furniture shifted slightly, angles wrong as if copied imperfectly. The books on the table sat open, pages blank. Yet, as he approached, words formed in real time, ink bubbling upward. "You are almost ready." He staggered back, colliding with the couch. The room pulsed faintly, walls breathing. In the corner, shadows thickened until they peeled away entirely. The figure unfolded taller, now limbs nearly scraping the ceiling. It leaned closer, posture, bent head tilting without face. Daniel could not breathe, his chest-locked vision narrowing. The figure extended one arm toward the notebook. Pages turned violently, stopping at a blank spread. Letters bled across. "Write your name." Daniel shook his head violently, whispering, no voice hoarse. The figure's hand pressed the pen onto the page, forcing it into his grip. His fingers wrapped unwillingly, pain shooting through joints. The pen dragged across paper, beginning a letter without his control. He fought desperately, arm trembling. The ink line cut jagged across the page, stopping short of completion. The figure hissed, though the sound was not air, but silence inverted, a vacuum pulling at his ears. Daniel dropped the pen, stumbling back. The words across the notebook shifted, "If not you, another." The room grew colder, frost crawling across window glass. Outside footsteps echoed along the hallway again. This time multiple sets, slow, heavy, deliberate. The footsteps outside Daniel's apartment door multiplied until they sounded like a slow march. Each impact reverberated through the floorboards, as though weight far heavier than human pressed down with every step. Daniel pressed his back against the wall, eyes fixed on the knob. The metal shivered faintly, rattling without touch. Then silence, not the comfort of absence, but a silence that swelled, carrying pressure into his skull. He swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the couch for balance. The notebook on the table flipped open violently, pages snapping in rapid sequence until stopping at the very center. Fresh words bled through "open to us." Daniel shook his head. "No," he whispered, though his own voice sounded weak, foreign, almost drowned beneath the silence. He forced himself toward the door. His hand hovered over the chain lock, trembling. He half expected it to slide free on its own. For now, it stayed firm. The footsteps resumed, but now they circled. He heard them above, crawling across the ceiling. He heard them in the stairwell, echoing down to the ground floor. He heard them behind every wall, synchronized, deliberate. The figure was no longer alone. Others had joined, unseen but undeniable. Desperate, Daniel grabbed the folklore book again. He flipped pages wildly until one passage caught his eye. Those marked "may resist, but gathering shadows feed upon resistance. Denial deepens their hold. The only chance lies not in refusal, but in recognition of the shared." He read it aloud, voice breaking. The room pulsed in response. Shadows along the corners deepened, bending toward him. The notebook's ink spread further, black lines dripping across the table like veins searching for ground. Daniel slammed the book shut. He considered running again out the window, down the hall, into the storm. But escape had failed before. Instead, he turned on every light in the apartment, television, microwave lamps, anything that could produce glow or sound. The space filled with buzzing, humming, a fragile attempt to drown the silence. For a moment it worked. He could breathe again, pulse slowing. Then the power cut instantly. Darkness swallowed him whole. Every device died at once. The silence surged back, heavier than ever. A knock echoed from the window this time. Daniel spun, heart hammering. On the glass, handprints appeared, elongated, smearing damp soil across the surface. They multiplied, spreading until no clear pane remained. From outside in the storm, bent figures leaned against the glass, faceless, countless pressing forward. Daniel stumbled backward, colliding with the bookshelf. Volumes toppled, scattering across the floor. He grabbed one, hurled it at the window. The glass did not break. The figures pressed closer, soil, streaking deeper, words forming in dripping lines. "Step out." He fell to his knees, clutching his head. His thoughts fractured, spinning between fight and surrender. He screamed into the darkness, voice shaking. "What do you want from me?" Silence answered at first. Then a whisper layered by dozens of voices, "To carry you where we go." The words chilled him, deeper than any storm. His body shook violently, as though his own muscles no longer fully belonged to him. He crawled to the drawer, pulled out the books, and held them tight against his chest. He begged them to stop, pleaded aloud, but the voices only grew louder, each whisper pressing through his skull like nails scraping bone. Suddenly, everything stilled. The window cleared, soil streaks evaporating into nothing. The silence thinned, returning to ordinary quiet. Daniel gasped for breath, sweat dripping from his hairline. For the first time in days, he felt almost alone. But then, from the corner of his eye, he saw his own reflection in the dark television screen. It was not seated on the couch as he was. It stood in the middle of the room, bent forward, arms hanging too long, waiting. Daniel staggered toward the bathroom, flipping on the light. For once it worked. Fluorescent glow filled the space. He gripped the sink, breathing heavily. His reflection in the mirror stared back at him. It looked tired, pale, broken, but it was still him. Relief lasted seconds. Behind his own reflection, multiple figures appeared one by one, filling the small frame, faceless, bent, all leaning closer. Daniel staggered back from the bathroom mirror shoulder, slamming against the tiled wall. The fluorescent bulb flickered overhead, buzzing faintly. His reflection remained still, but the other forms crowded behind it, faceless, and bent their shadows, bending over his own. When his eyes opened, the mirror was empty again, only his fractured face staring back, pale and shaking. He gripped the sink, head lowered, trying to breathe. Cold water splashed across his face did nothing to steady him. His pulse still pounded violently in his ears. He whispered to himself, voice trembling, "I'm still here. I'm still me." The words felt hollow, as if something else already echoed them inside his chest. When he stepped back into the living room, the notebook lay open on the table. He had not touched it. The words across its pages shifted like liquid sentences forming and dissolving before his eyes. He moved closer, reading fragments: highway, soil, corridor, carried. Each word shimmered before dripping down into the paper, absorbed like rain into earth. Daniel slammed it shut, but his fingers stuck briefly to the cover, as if moisture seeped through leather. He wiped his hand on his jeans, heart racing. For a moment, he thought to burn it to end everything in one desperate fire. But an image invaded his mind, flames rising, shadows feeding instead of retreating, spreading through smoke into the air of others. He could not risk it. Outside rain thickened, pounding against windows with relentless rhythm. The power surged again, lights flickering before settling into a weak, pale glow. Daniel sat on the couch, exhausted. He tried to focus on the sound of the storm, reminding himself it was real, physical, ordinary. Yet beneath the thunder, another noise pressed forward, the faint scraping of long limbs across walls. At 2:00 a.m., his phone lit on its own. A new message appeared with no sender. Drive. Daniel stared at it, chest tightening. The word pulsed once on screen before fading into blank white. He grabbed his keys impulsively, shoved the books into his bag, and left the apartment. The city streets were nearly empty. Neon signs reflected off slick pavement, their colors bending into distorted shapes. Daniel drove aimlessly at first, headlights, cutting narrow tunnels through the rain. Then, without realizing, he found himself on US Route 26 again, the same road where everything had begun. Fog thickened across the asphalt. Pines leaned closer, their branches dripping. The sensation returned instantly, weight in the passenger seat invisible but undeniable. Daniel clenched the wheel tighter, eyes fixed forward. He refused to look sideways. Mile markers blurred. At 71, where the abandoned station stood, his headlights flickered. Through cracked glass, he saw it again, movement bent, limbs shifting. This time more than one shape. 2, then 3, pressed together in unnatural stillness. Daniel accelerated, chest hammering. Minutes later, the road stretched into complete fog. Visibility shrank to feet. His heart raced, palms slick with sweat. Then in the center of the lane, multiple figures appeared, tall and bent, blocking the way forward. Daniel slammed the brakes. Tires screamed, truck fishtailed violently. He gripped the wheel, breath torn from his throat. The truck skidded to a stop yards away. The figures did not move. They leaned forward in unison, arms hanging, posture impossible. Daniel's headlights illuminated them fully for the first time. Their surfaces were not skin, but shifting shadow soaked with streaks of soil dripping steadily onto asphalt. Where faces should be, only voids gaped. The engine roared impatiently under his trembling foot. He considered ramming through them, but a deeper instinct warned collision would only pull him deeper. He reversed instead, tires spinning against wet road, backing away. Yet the figures moved with him, distance never changing. Suddenly his radio burst alive. Static crackled, then words layered by countless voices emerged. "Follow," Daniel shouted, shaking his head, refusing. The static grew louder, bleeding from speakers, vibrating his chest. Then silence, instant absolute. His headlights cut out again. Darkness swallowed everything. In that void, only one sound remained, breathing heavy, wet, filling the cab. The passenger seat groaned under weight, unseen. Daniel gripped the wheel tighter, forcing himself not to turn his head. A whisper slid inches from his ear. "You are ready now." Daniel's hands ached from gripping the wheel too tightly. The cab smelled of damp earth, stronger than ever, as if the forest itself had crawled inside. His lungs burned, each breath heavy with moisture. He tried to focus on the road ahead, though headlights remained dark. Only the faint glow of the dashboard lit his trembling face. The passenger seat creaked again. Pressure shifted as if something large adjusted its posture. Daniel's peripheral vision betrayed him, an elongated limb brushing against the door, vanishing when he dared to glance fully. His chest tightened. He whispered to himself, voice shaking, "Not real, not real." The notebook in his bag thudded, suddenly vibrating like a heartbeat. Daniel flinched. He reached back blindly, fingers grazing the cover. Heat pulsed through fabric, almost burning his skin. The whispers returned, layered voices seeping into the cab. Right, name, share. Daniel shouted, slamming his fist against the dashboard, "Leave me alone." His voice cracked, swallowed instantly by silence. For a moment, even the rain outside ceased, as though the world itself had paused. Then slowly headlights flickered back alive. The road stretched ahead empty, but only for seconds. Figures lined the shoulder now, dozens of them bent in identical postures, faceless heads tilting in unison as the truck rolled forward. Their shadows spilled across asphalt, reaching unnaturally long. Daniel pressed harder on the accelerator, desperate to pass them. Yet no matter the speed, they remained parallel, endless procession of silent watchers, his vision blurred with exhaustion and terror. Then up ahead he saw something new. A car abandoned on the roadside, doors wide open. Soil streaked across the pavement, leading into trees. Daniel slowed instinctively. He recognized the vehicle, a sedan he had glimpsed days earlier at the rest stop. Breath caught in his throat. Its occupants were gone, replaced by nothing but wet footprints trailing into darkness. He sped past, refusing to stop. His body shook uncontrollably, but he forced his hands steady. He whispered again, almost pleading, "I won't follow, I won't die." The radio crackled alive, static roaring, a voice layered with many repeated, "You already have." Daniel slammed the power off, but static continued, pouring from vents, vibrating glass. His teeth chattered from the sound, a resonance deeper than noise. Suddenly the truck lurched violently to one side. He yanked the wheel, barely keeping it on the road. Something heavy scraped along the trailer, long fingers dragging across metal. The sound pierced into his skull, a disturbance in the silence masquerading as contact. Daniel screamed, flooring the accelerator. The engine howled, speed climbing, yet the sound followed, scraping, pulling, dragging. He checked the mirrors, shadows clung to the truck's side, climbing upward like spiders with limbs too long. Their shapes bent against headlights, impossible angles shifting. He swerved wildly, but they clung tighter. Daniel grabbed the folklore book with one hand, flipping pages blindly. Words blurred, but one line burned through roads or veins. To travel is to feed them. His stomach turned. The book slipped from his grip, falling open on the floor, pages glowing faintly. Ink pulsed like liquid veins, letters twisting into shapes not human. The truck shook violently, dashboard lights flashing. Daniel thought he heard voices outside, dozens whispering in chorus, "Join." His knuckles whitened on the wheel. He shouted again, louder. "No!" For a moment, everything stilled. The shadows vanished, scraping ceased, silence returned. He gasped, tears burning his eyes. Relief cracked his chest open. Then headlights illuminated what lay directly ahead. Not one figure this time, but hundreds crowding the entire highway, stretching beyond sight. All bent forward, faceless arms dangling. The road was gone, only them remained, endless wall of shadow waiting. Daniel slammed the brakes, tires screamed. The truck skidded across wet asphalt, spinning violently. His body slammed against the seatbelt, breath torn away. The cab shook metal, groaning. For a moment, he thought the vehicle would flip. It stopped sideways across the road, headlights pointing uselessly into trees. The highway was empty again, no figures, only rain. Daniel gasped for air, chest aching, ears ringing. He rested his forehead against the wheel, whispering incoherently. Then softly from the seat beside him, a voice whispered alone. "Next time you won't wake." Daniel sat in the truck for nearly an hour, too afraid to move. Rain hammered the windshield in steady rhythm, but every sound reminded him of whispers. His hands shook violently on the wheel until he forced himself to release his grip. He knew staying on the road would end in collapse, but returning to the apartment felt equally dangerous. Every option circled back to the same presence, the same bent figures waiting beyond sight. Finally, he restarted the engine. He drove slowly, headlights cutting narrow tunnels through the storm. For miles, the highway remained empty. The stillness gnawed at him worse than company. He felt like a rat caught in glass, observed, trapped, directionless. Near dawn, he pulled into another truck stop. Fluorescent lights flickered above, buzzing faintly. The diner inside looked identical to the one he had fled before, down to the same red booths and humming jukebox. He wondered if exhaustion blurred his memory, or if something darker repeated spaces around him, holding reality to keep him confined. He entered, sat at a booth, and ordered black coffee. The waitress smiled politely, oblivious to his trembling hands. Daniel gripped the folklore book on the table, unwilling to open, but unable to release it. The notebook thudded in his bag, with steady rhythm like another heart beating beside his own. As he stirred, the untouched coffee movement in the window caught his attention. His reflection stared back, but something shifted in its posture. Shoulders bent, neck craned unnaturally forward. He blinked, and the reflection straightened into normalcy. He pressed a palm against the glass heart, hammering, convinced the surface had thinned. Another driver entered the diner, rain dripping from his jacket. He nodded at Daniel, sat a booth away, and pulled out his phone. For the first time in days, Daniel considered telling someone desperate for validation. His lips parted, but the notebook in his bag shuddered, violently knocking against the booth seat. Daniel froze, words dying in his throat. The driver glanced up briefly, shrugged, and returned to his screen. Daniel realized then, speaking aloud might spread it further. The folklore book's warnings echoed, naming binds the shadow to the written page, words invite. He clenched his jaw, sipping bitter coffee, just to occupy himself. By noon, he left the diner. The other driver remained face half hidden, but Daniel caught one detail, and passing soil streaked across the man's boots. His stomach dropped. He hurried out, rain drenching him instantly, and climbed back into his truck. On the road again, fatigue returned like a weight. He drove until the horizon blurred sky pressing low. At mile marker 93, he pulled onto a gravel turnout and killed the engine. Silence filled the cab, broken only by rain tapping the roof. He closed his eyes just for a moment. Sleep overtook him. Dreams surged immediately. He walked along a corridor lined with countless doors. Each door bore his name written in wet black ink. Behind the doors, whispers echoed, begging him to open. He resisted, walking farther. At the end of the hall, the bent figure waited. Not alone this time, hundreds crowded behind it, limbs stretching into infinity. Their voices merged soon. Daniel woke with a violent jolt. The truck interior was damp soil streaking the dashboard. His seatbelt pressed tight across his chest, though he had not buckled it. The passenger seatbelt hung clasped as if holding weight. His throat tightened. He forced himself not to touch it. He turned the key. The engine resisted, coughing before roaring alive. As headlights illuminated the turnout, he froze. Dozens of wet footprints surrounded the truck, circling in tight rings. No figures remained visible, but the evidence was undeniable. They had been here while he slept. Panic rose. Daniel drove back toward Portland, refusing to stop again. By evening, he reached the city exhausted but alive. His apartment loomed familiar yet hostile. Against every instinct he entered. Inside, nothing had changed. The books remained on the table drawer, open pages blank. But as he crossed the room, the words surfaced once more. You cannot resist forever. Daniel collapsed onto the couch, clutching his head. He knew the truth now. Running, hiding, resisting it only delayed. The figure or figures would return each night, closer, heavier, hungrier. His only question remained, when they finally stepped fully inside, what part of him would still exist. That night he dreamed not of highways but of water. Black waves stretching endlessly, soil floating across the surface like islands. The figures stood across the waves, bent bodies swaying with the tide. One extended its hand. Daniel reached reluctantly. When their fingers touched, he felt his skin dissolve into shadow. He woke with soil spread across his chest like a handprint. Daniel sat upright on the couch, staring at the dark handprint across his chest. The soil crumbled slightly when he brushed it, releasing a smell of wet earth that did not belong inside any apartment. His stomach turned. He stumbled to the bathroom, stripped off his shirt, and scrubbed his skin until it burned red. Yet faint stains remained, black streaks that no amount of soap erased. He gripped the sink, eyes locked on the mirror. At first, only his exhausted reflection stared back. Then slowly behind his image, more handprints surfaced across the glass, dozens of them pressing from the other side. Each one elongated fingers, too long, palms dripping. They spread until the mirror was black with prints, and in the center his reflection bent forward, posture wrong. Daniel struck the glass with his fist. The mirror spiderwebbed, but did not break. The prints faded instantly, leaving only his fractured reflection staring back through a net of cracks. His knuckles bled faintly, but even that seemed altered. The fluid was darker, thicker, nearly soil in color. He staggered back, whispering, "No, no, no." The notebook on the table flipped open again. Pages filled with new words, as if written by invisible hands. "You are marked." Daniel slammed it shut, shoved it deep into the drawer, and locked it. But the words burned inside his skull, repeating without ink. Unable to remain indoors, he left the apartment. Rain poured steadily, streets shining black. He drove until city lights dimmed behind him, rural roads stretching endlessly ahead. At mile marker 118, he pulled into a small church lot. The building stood old, its steeple, crooked lights faint inside. Daniel entered cautiously. Wooden pews stretched toward an altar lit by a single candle. An old priest knelt, whispering prayers. Daniel cleared his throat, voice breaking as he spoke. "Something follows me." The priest turned eyes, sunken face pale. He rose slowly, studying Daniel with unsettling calm. "You have carried it far," the priest said softly. Daniel's chest tightened. He had expected disbelief, perhaps comfort, not recognition. The priest approached, hands trembling. "They are old as the roads," he murmured. "Shadows of travelers who never arrived. They seek hosts to continue walking." Daniel nearly collapsed into a pew. "How do I stop it?" he begged. The priest shook his head slowly. "Stopping is not given, only passing." His eyes glistened with sorrow. "To leave them you must place the mark on another, deliberate, willing or not." Daniel recoiled. His mind flashed images of strangers in diners, clerks in motels, even the other driver with soil on his boots. Guilt flooded him. He whispered, "I can't do that." The priest placed a hand on his shoulder. His skin was cold, clammy. "Then it will consume you, and through you others." Daniel pulled away, trembling. The priest stepped back, shadows stretching unnaturally across the altar. He fled the church rain, soaking him instantly, and drove off into the night. Hours later, fatigue overtook him. He parked beneath a bridge engine, idling low. His eyelids drooped, mind fractured. When he opened them again, he was no longer in the truck. He stood in the corridor of doors once more. Every door bore his name, ink dripping steadily. This time, one door swung open. Inside was his apartment, but distorted walls bent inward, shadows thick like water. The figure waited, inside arm, extended handprint already black across its chest, mirroring his own. Its whisper filled the corridor. "Choose or be chosen." Daniel staggered back, screaming silently. He slammed the door shut, but his name bled through the wood letters stretching outward. He woke gasping in the truck's soil, streaking his hands though he had not touched ground. His chest-burned handprint, darker, etched into his skin now like a brand. The brand across Daniel's chest pulsed faintly beneath his shirt, hot then cold as though alive. Every breath reminded him it was there, seared deeper than flesh. He sat in the truck until dawn bled pale across the horizon. Exhaustion dragged at his body, but fear anchored him awake. Birds stirred in the trees, their calls muted. The world outside appeared ordinary, yet Daniel knew it was thin veneer. He drove aimlessly, searching for anywhere that might offer answers. Gas stations, diners, empty roads, they all blended together, each carrying the same reflection in glass-bent forms, lingering where none should be. By late morning, he reached another town, its main street nearly deserted in rain. He parked, stepped into a hardware store, and wandered aisles with hollow eyes. He bought matches, lighter fluid and salt. The clerk rang him up without comment, though Daniel noticed soil streaks beneath the man's fingernails. His stomach clenched. He left quickly, items clutched like talismans. Back at his apartment, Daniel poured salt across thresholds, windowsills, every possible entry point. He doused the books in lighter fluid, struck a match, and held it trembling over their covers. But again, the image invaded flames, rising shadows, multiplying through smoke, carried further than before. His hand froze. He blew the match out, chest tight. He shoved the books back into the drawer, but they rattled violently, as if mocking him. Words burned faintly on the wood above. Not escape, only share. Daniel collapsed against the wall, head in hands. Afternoon drifted into night. He refused to sleep, yet exhaustion clawed his mind. His eyelids grew heavy until he jolted awake to a sound, the knob turning. He stared as the chain rattled but held. The noise stopped. He forced himself to breathe. Then he saw it, soil leaking beneath the door, spreading slowly across the floorboards, inch by inch. Daniel grabbed the matches again, ready to strike flame against the growing stain. But before he could, words formed in the soil itself. Choose. He stumbled back, heart hammering. His mind flashed the priest's words, passing it on. Was this the moment? Was choice demanded, not optional? In desperation, Daniel opened his phone, scrolling through contacts. His sister's number appeared. His thumb hovered, trembling. Could he call, speak, name it, and pass it forward? The thought sickened him. He dropped the phone, shaking violently. The soil spread faster, reaching his shoes. Coldness seeped into his skin. He shouted, voice cracking, I won't give it to anyone." The silence deepened instantly, suffocating. Then a whisper slithered from every corner. "Then it will take." The room plunged colder. Frost spidered across glass, shadows peeling from walls. Multiple figures emerged, tall or bent, crowding until space seemed smaller than it was. Daniel screamed, grabbing the folklore book again. He flipped pages desperately until one phrase cut through his panic, binding through witness. He read aloud, voice shaking, binding through witness. The figures paused, shadows recoiling slightly. Daniel's heart surged with hope. He repeated louder, binding through witness. For a brief moment the room steadied. The soil froze, mid-spread shadows retreating toward corners. Silence fractured. But then the notebook opened violently, pen dragging across page by invisible hand. Witness requires another. Daniel stared at the words, breath shallow. He realized the meaning someone else had to see, to acknowledge, to carry part of it with him. Without that, he remained alone, prey without defense. He backed into the corner, whispering, "No, no, no." The figures pressed forward again, limbs scraping ceiling, arms bending at impossible angles. The soil pulsed like veins across the floor. Daniel screamed into the silence. "What happens if I don't?" The answer came instantly, layered voices tearing through the air. "You dissolve." Daniel spent the following day in a fog of dread. The words from the shadow chorus, "You dissolve," echoed in his skull, until thought itself felt infected. He moved mechanically, drawing curtains tight, placing salt in every corner again, whispering fragments of prayers, though his throat cracked with exhaustion. Yet none of it erased, the mark burned into his chest. It pulsed faintly, not like a wound, but like a signal. When he finally opened the folklore book again, he forced himself to read, not just scattered lines, but entire chapters. The text shifted tone from fragmented anecdotes to what resembled records, investigations compiled across decades. Travelers vanishing on roads, remains found weeks later without explanation. Journals recovered, filled with handwriting that changed midway, as if authorship had transferred. Daniel read with obsessive precision. Each account carried patterns: the soil, the silence, the bent posture of figures, the demand for passing. One entry chilled him more than the rest. It described a man in the 1932nd, a long-haul driver between Salem and Portland. His journal detailed encounters almost identical to Daniel's fog on highways, figures in mirrors, messages etched in condensation. The man described resisting until finally giving in writing his name when commanded. The next entry, written in a different hand, claimed ownership of the journal and spoke of carrying the burden further west. The driver's remains were never located. Daniel slammed the book shut, chest tight. He realized this was not just folklore. It was record fragments of a contagion passed through time, binding host after host, stretching across generations. Every attempt at resistance delayed but never destroyed. Binding required witness, release demanded passing, and dissolution awaited those who refused both. He stood at the window, staring at rain, streaking down glass. His own reflection seemed thinner, darker, as if shadows beneath skin deepened each hour. He pressed his fingers against the glass, comparing them to the elongated prints that had appeared nights before. They were nearly the same length now. His body was changing. By evening, he could no longer deny it. His voice faltered when he spoke aloud. Words echoed faintly, layered as though another tone spoke with him. He tested a sentence, "I am here." The air returned it in doubled cadence. His own voice overlapped with something wetter, deeper. His stomach lurched. He wrote frantically in the notebook, documenting every symptom, every detail. At first the words were his, then new sentences appeared beneath. "We are here too." He slammed it shut, horrified. That night sleep dragged him unwillingly into visions. He stood on a highway submerged in water, asphalt sinking slowly beneath waves. Bent figures walked calmly along the surface, their reflections stretching deeper than the sea itself. They carried books, all identical pages open and dripping. One approached, pressed a book into his hands and whispered, "You are archived now." Daniel woke, trembling, sweat freezing against his skin. The mark on his chest pulsed brighter edges, spreading outward like veins. He rushed to the bathroom mirror, ripping his shirt off. The pattern had grown branching lines, crawling toward his shoulder and stomach. It resembled roots pressing through flesh. He clawed at it, desperately, nails, scraping skin, but no pain registered. Only a damp, earthy smell rose from the streaks. He collapsed against the sink, whispering to himself that he still had choices. He remembered the priest's words, passing it on. He remembered the book's phrase, binding through witness. Both required another person, deliberate or accidental. His stomach twisted at the thought. Was survival worth condemning someone else? Was dissolution better than spreading infection? The silence answered him, heavy and absolute. From the corner of the mirror, letters formed faintly in condensation, "Witness soon." Daniel staggered back. The decision would not remain his forever. Either he acted or the figure acted for him. And if that happened, he would not only dissolve, he would become part of the collective archive, whispering through corridors, urging the next traveler forward. Daniel spent the next day drowning in notes. He filled scraps of paper with sketches of corridors, bent figures, soil patterns, even fragments of the whispers. He mapped mile markers from his drives, tracing points where manifestations had occurred. A pattern emerged, most encounters clustered along the same stretch of highway, between abandoned stations and rest stops where others had disappeared. He pinned the pages across his wall, forming a desperate investigation of his own. The folklore book offered little comfort. Every story ended the same. A host either passed the mark or dissolved into the collective. None described escape. Daniel flipped through margins, hunting for overlooked fragments, and found faint handwriting in pencil different from the printed text. It read, "Containment attempted, near Rock Creek failed." Another line, "Never burn. Fire only spreads them." He circled the words repeatedly, stomach twisting. Whoever wrote them had known. Perhaps another host, perhaps a researcher. Either way, failure was consistent. Daniel wondered if his own scribbles would one day appear in another edition, another warning ignored. At night he tested barriers. He salted doors again, placed iron objects in corners, whispered prayers in languages he half remembered. For a moment the silence thinned. But then the notebook on his desk opened with forced pages trembling. Words etched deep. "Faith does not bind us." Daniel hurled it across the room, shaking. He collapsed on the couch, hands covering his face. His body ached constantly now, as though muscles resisted his control. When he flexed his fingers, they lingered too long in bent shapes before straightening. He stared in horror. The transformation was not symbolic, it was physical. Sleep stole him despite resistance. Dreams carried him back to corridors, but this time he saw others. Travelers walking beside him, faces blurred, all bearing the same chest mark. They avoided each other's eyes, each clutching a book. At the end, hundreds of doors opened in unison, shadows spilling outward. The bent figures merged with hosts' lines between them erased. A chorus filled the hall, archived rows. He jolted awake, gasping sweat, soaking his pillow. His phone buzzed on the table. A new message from an unknown number. "You are close." He deleted it instantly, but the words appeared again across the lock screen, carved deeper each time he tried to erase them. Finally, he shut the phone off, but the screen glowed faintly anyway, whispering static. By afternoon, Daniel returned to the highway. He had convinced himself answers remained there, where it all began. Fog clung to the road trees, pressing closer than memory recalled. He parked near the abandoned station. Windows gaped open like wounds. Inside, shelves collapsed, soil scattered across tile in deliberate patterns spiraling outward. He knelt, tracing one spiral with trembling fingers. It pulsed faintly beneath his touch, alive. Whispers surged instantly, louder than before, vibrating inside his skull. "Stay, join." Daniel staggered back, clutching his head, forcing himself out into the rain. He leaned against the truck, gasping. His reflection in the side mirror revealed the mark on his chest, glowing faintly through fabric. Behind him, in the reflection, only figures crowded the station doorway. Not one dozens. Daniel drove away in panic, but something heavy pressed against the cab roof, dragging claws across metal. He swerved wildly, nearly crashing into guardrails. The sound stopped as suddenly as it began. He pulled over, chest pounding. Soil streaked the roof when he stepped out, lines forming words closer. Back in the cab, he buried his face in his hands. He knew now with certainty resisting only deepened their hold. He had hours, maybe days, before choice was forced. His options narrowed to two: condemn another or dissolve. The folklore book sat open on the passenger seat. New words appeared, not printed, not handwritten. "We will help you choose." Daniel screamed, slamming it shut. But inside, part of him felt relief. The weight of decision was unbearable. Maybe surrendering choice was easier than carrying it. Daniel spent the night dissecting every scrap of information he had gathered. His walls became a crime scene, board maps, scribbled timelines, transcribed whispers. He forced himself into the role of investigator, hoping precision might offer power. What emerged unsettled him even more. This was not random. The figures had history, one far older than highways or gas stations. The folklore book's deeper chapters described rituals among early settlers of the region. Travelers vanished on unlit trails between Salem and the coast. Survivors spoke of silent watchers bending among the trees. Native oral accounts reference something similar, though details blurred shadows of those who died wandering, unable to cross into rest. They lingered, demanding companionship, binding themselves to anyone who looked too long into the dark. Daniel underlined each passage, heart racing. This was not modern invention, it was continuity. He cross-referenced accounts with his map. The corridor stretched across centuries, from native paths to wagon trails, from dirt roads to highways. Every generation described the same markers: soil appearing indoors, distorted reflections, voices layered in silence. Daniel realized the figures were not confined to one era. They adapted to routes of travel, feeding wherever humans journeyed. He leaned back, chest aching beneath the spreading mark. Archive grows, the dream voices had said. He understood now, this was not a haunting, it was accumulation. Each new host added to a collective memory, ensuring the shadow figure persisted through centuries. A parasite, yes, but also a library built of those consumed. His body confirmed the truth. The black streak across his chest now branched down his arm, veins like ink beneath skin. When he pressed them, no pulse beat. Instead, faint vibrations hummed as though soil shifted beneath the surface. He recorded it in notes with forensic precision, mark spreads. No pain, function replaced by resonance. He wrote like an investigator, but fear clawed every word. He tested his voice again. He read aloud one of his notes. The echo overlapped stronger, now a second tone beneath his own, wet and gravelly. He pressed a recorder close. Playback revealed two voices, indeed his, and another repeating. He hurled the device across the room, bile rising in his throat. Evidence did not comfort. It confirmed dissolution had already begun. Desperate, Daniel searched beyond the book. Online archives revealed scattered references, missing drivers, abandoned vehicles, police reports dismissed as accidents. Buried among them, he found a letter scanned from 1894. It described a preacher in Oregon, warning congregants about the silent procession that waits upon the road. The preacher claimed those taken are added to the dark choir that travels unseen. The letter ended abruptly, ink smeared. No record of the preacher after that year. Daniel closed the laptop, trembling. He whispered, "It's all the same story." His reflection in the black screen whispered it back, voice, not his. By dawn, exhaustion blurred his thoughts. He leaned against the wall of notes, staring at the spiral patterns he had drawn. They matched the soil spirals in the abandoned station. He realized they were not random. They were diagrams of connection roads, as veins, intersections, as feeding points. Wherever humans moved in numbers, the figures multiplied, ensuring continuity. He documented the conclusion in his notebook: cause equals accumulated travelers who failed crossing, manifest as bent shadows. Aim equals archive of movement. Process equals selection, marking dissolution or passing. Origin equals older than settlement. The page trembled beneath his pen. Letters shifted, rewriting his words. Correct. Daniel dropped the notebook file, burning his throat. The figures themselves confirmed his analysis. They were aware of his investigation, and they approved. He no longer studied them from outside. He had become part of their archive in real time. He stumbled to the window, desperate for ordinary sights. Cars passed below, pedestrians with umbrellas, life moving. Yet every reflection in the wet pavement showed the same figures, bent, faceless, walking beside ordinary people who remained unaware. His chest constricted. The infection was wider than he imagined. He was not alone. No one was. Behind him, the notebook opened again. Ink bled across the page in thick lines. Next assimilation. Daniel barely left the apartment. Curtains remained drawn, walls covered in notes pinned like case files. He wrote every symptom with precision, forcing himself into the role of investigator rather than victim. His handwriting grew jagged, letters elongated unconsciously. Sometimes he stopped mid-sentence to realize the words were no longer his own. The notebook on the table filled itself in tandem, recording lines he had not written. Assimilation proceeds. The mark spread further across his body. Black veins branched across his shoulder, curling down his arm and across his ribs. The skin no longer felt like his. It was cool, damp, as though layers of soil pressed beneath. When he touched it, vibrations hummed faintly like countless whispers compressed into flesh. He documented the sensation clinically. Progress equals rapid, identity equals unstable. His voice fractured further. When he spoke aloud, echoes followed instantly. Not delayed, not playback, simultaneous, like two mouths within one throat. The second voice was deeper, faceless, layered with moisture. Each syllable left a taste of earth on his tongue. He stopped speaking entirely, terrified of giving them more ground. Instead, he read silently. The folklore book revealed fragments of ritualistic attempts to halt assimilation. Witness accounts described carvings, circles of salt mirrors turned inward. None succeeded beyond days. One testimony scrawled in the margin read, "I saw myself bend. I begged for it to end." Daniel underlined it, handshaking. By nightfall, silence thickened until he could hear his own heartbeat slow. He stared at the ceiling, fighting to remain awake, but sleep pulled him again. In dreams, he no longer stood in the corridor alone. Others walked beside him, faces half familiar, blurred, all bearing chest marks branching like his. Their books opened in unison, pages wet dripping. He heard their whispers, "You will archive, you will teach." He woke gasping, but his body no longer responded quickly. Limbs felt heavier, movements slower. He staggered to the bathroom. In the mirror, his reflection bent slightly forward, shoulders sagging, posture wrong. He tried to straighten, but the image resisted. His knees buckled. He slammed the mirror with his fist. Cracks spread, but the reflection remained, bent, faceless, now staring back with void where eyes should be. Daniel stumbled back, collapsing against the tub. He whispered, "Not me, not yet." The words echoed, doubled, second voice louder this time. He clamped his hands over his mouth, horrified. When he returned to the living room, the notebook lay open, a single phrase across its center. "Pass now or vanish." He dropped into the couch, head in hands. The priest's warning returned, passing required deliberate choice. But who could he condemn another? The idea tore him apart. Yet dissolution loomed closer each hour. His phone buzzed. A new text, "We are already in your voice." He hurled the device across the room, screen shattering. The message still glowed faintly, crawling across broken glass. Daniel left the apartment in panic. Rain poured steady outside, pavement slick. Every car mirror, every window reflected bent figures walking beside him. Pedestrians passed unaware. He screamed at one man, shaking his shoulder, begging him to look. The man only frowned, muttered, and walked faster. Daniel's reflection in the man's umbrella showed both of them bent, faceless, leaning closer. He fled back to the truck, slamming the door. The seat beside him sank as though weight pressed down. He clutched the wheel, shaking violently. His chest mark pulsed in rhythm with raindrops on the windshield. Whispering filled the cab, "Archived. Assimilate." He slammed the engine to life, speeding onto the highway. Adrenaline surged. He swore he would find a way, ritual, witness anything. He refused to dissolve. Yet deep inside, a darker part of him admitted something else. The assimilation did not only terrify, it pulled. It promised release from fear, a merging into something vast, ancient, endless. For one fleeting second, Daniel almost welcomed it. Daniel drove through the storm like a man possessed, though he knew better than to call it possession. The folklore book had replaced the word long ago, altered psychological state. That phrase repeated in his head as rain blurred the windshield and the wipers screeched. He told himself this was still his mind, still his thoughts, still his will. But even as he repeated it, another whisper threaded beneath ours. He pulled off at a deserted rest area, headlights sweeping across cracked pavement and overflowing drains. The lot was empty. He parked, engine running, and stared at the passenger seat. The indentation deepened, weight undeniable. Soil streaks spread across upholstery, though no physical body sat there. Daniel pressed his palm against the mark on his chest. It pulsed in sync with the weight beside him. He spoke aloud, voice fractured into two tones. "You want me?" The second tone completed the sentence without permission. "Because you are already us." Daniel slapped his own mouth, horrified. His body no longer respected boundaries between self and other. He stumbled out of the truck, rain drenching him instantly. The rest area building loomed with dead fluorescent lights. He entered anyway, water dripping from his clothes. Inside, silence pressed heavy. The mirrors above the sinks were broken shards scattered across floor tiles. Each shard reflected bent figures swaying, though Daniel stood alone. He kicked the pieces away, refusing to look. In a stall, soil covered the seat in spirals. He recognized the pattern now, connection diagrams, threads weaving across time and space. He knelt despite disgust, tracing them with a trembling finger. Voices swelled. "You learn, you archive, you continue." He yanked his hand away, shoving back tears. Knowledge felt like infection disguised as discovery. Back in the cab, he opened the folklore book again. New pages surfaced, ones he swore had not existed before. They detailed stages of assimilation in clinical tone. Marking, echoed voice. Reflection distortion. Physical alteration. Dissolution into archive unless transfer achieved. Beneath the list, a single handwritten note. Stage 5 equals irreversible. Daniel slammed the book shut, chest aching. He was between stages 4 and 5. Time narrowed. His options thinned to 2 lines: pass it deliberately or vanish completely. He pulled out a map tracing routes he had traveled. His pen circled the abandoned station, the crooked church, the rest stops. Each location glowed in memory with soil and whispers. He wrote beneath anchor points. He realized the figures were not random. They anchored themselves along corridors of movement, feeding on travelers who passed. The highways were veins, the stations nodes, the hosts temporary vessels. The realization made his hands shake violently. He whispered, "It isn't haunting, it's structure." The echo beneath his voice whispered louder, "It is system." Daniel buried his face in his hands. His mind fought 2 wars, the investigator in him cataloging facts with cold logic, and the survivor in him screaming for escape. Both roads circled back to the same end. The archive consumed, the archive endured. He could not undo centuries of accumulation. A violent pounding rattled the truck roof. He looked up, heart hammering. Soil dripped onto the windshield, forming letters in streaks. Choose. He shouted into the storm, "I won't condemn anyone." His voice split again, second tone mocking. "Then you condemn yourself." The mark on his chest flared hot. His arms bent inward, involuntarily, shoulders hunching. He fought to straighten, screaming, but his own body resisted. Through rain-streaked glass, he saw his reflection in the side mirror. It was no longer entirely him. It bent faceless arms, too long posture collapsing into theirs. He tore his gaze away, gripping the wheel until knuckles whitened. "Not yet," he whispered, but the echo corrected him, "already." Daniel woke to the sound of knocking, though he did not remember falling asleep. He was still in the truck engine, silent rain, tapping against the roof in uneven rhythm. The knocking came from the passenger side window. He turned slowly. No one stood outside. Still, the glass rattled as if struck from within. The seat beside him bore a deeper impression, now shape almost human, though bent unnaturally toward him. His chest mark pulsed again, spreading faint warmth down his arm. When he lifted his sleeve, black lines reached his wrist, curling like vines. He wrote the change down mechanically in his notes, though his handwriting had warped further letters, lengthened angles, crooked, resembling the spirals drawn in soil. He stared at the words with horror. His investigation was no longer detached analysis. It was record of his own assimilation. He drove back to the city, though memory of the journey blurred. One moment trees surrounded him, the next neon lights glowed across wet streets. He parked near the waterfront, waves slamming the shore. In reflections on puddles, he saw multiple figures walking in step with him. They passed beneath lamps, faceless heads, bent arms swaying too long. Yet pedestrians near him remained oblivious. The 2 realities overlapped seamlessly, now ordinary world, layered with archived presence. Daniel sought a library, hoping for answers buried in old manuscripts. Inside, dust thickened the air, and the silence pressed heavy. He flipped through regional histories, finding fragments of the Silent Road Choir in obscure notes. Accounts described travelers who vanished after claiming they heard breathing in mirrors. Another fragment detailed a family in 1912 who abandoned their farmhouse after walls filled with soil every night. Each record ended without resolution. Survivors stopped writing. The archive continued. In one brittle newspaper clipping, Daniel read about a coroner's discovery: remains pulled from a creek bed near Rock Creek. The skin of the corpse bore branching black lines identical to his own mark. Cause of death listed: decomposition, accelerated, origin unknown. Daniel photographed the page with shaking hands. Evidence existed. He was not delusional. But evidence gave no solution, only confirmation of fate. As night fell, Daniel returned to his apartment. Notes covered the walls, but he added the new clipping, pinning it beside his sketches of corridors. He sat in the dark, whispering to himself, "There must be a way." The echo voice corrected, "There is only way." At 3:00 a.m., he heard footsteps again in the hallway, this time more deliberate, heavier, as though multiple figures marched together. He pressed his ear to the door. Silence returned instantly. He turned back into the room and froze. Soil spread across the floor in spirals again, forming words: "You delay, you dissolve." Daniel collapsed to his knees, sobbing. His mind fractured between 2 voices, one begging for mercy, the other cataloging evidence of assimilation. He realized he was both victim and researcher, both test subject and recorder. The archive required his notes. His resistance served them. His analysis was part of their growth. He hurled the folklore book against the wall. It landed open. Across its pages, fresh ink bled. You cannot fight what you already are. Daniel screamed, tearing pages, scattering them like dead leaves. Yet the words reformed on every scrap, repeating the same phrase until the room swayed with whispers. He grabbed his phone again. In desperation, he dialed his sister's number, hand trembling. The call connected. Her voice answered, soft with sleep. "Daniel, what's wrong?" Tears blurred his vision. He opened his mouth to explain, to beg to pass. His sister gasped. "Who is that?" Daniel slammed the phone shut, hurling it against the wall. His body shook violently. The choice had nearly been made for him. He pressed both hands over his ears, but the whispers came from within, now endless, layered, erasing thought. On the wall, his notes rearranged themselves. Pages fluttered until patterns emerged, spirals widening, words spelling out next stage, reflection, collapse. Daniel stared in horror. He realized soon he would no longer recognize his own face. Daniel taped newspapers across every mirror, then turned cameras toward himself. He needed measurements, timestamps, proof that a face still existed. Clinical steps comforted him. Rituals disguised as method felt safer than prayer or salt. The first test failed in under a minute. His phone preview showed only a gray smear where features should be. He wiped the lens carefully, refocused, steadied his hands. The smear stretched longer, bending like a shadow cast by broken bone. He shut the camera, breath, uneven fingers, cold despite the heat. He tried the apartment building's lobby camera next. A monitor mounted near the mailboxes looped internal feeds. Daniel waited until the elevator doors opened. He stepped inside, quickly eyes on the screen. The lobby view showed the doors close. No one had entered. The elevator rose, empty numbers, climbing while he stood within, breathing. The feed refused to admit him. He documented each observation, fighting panic with bullet points. Reflection collapse evident. External systems validate absence. Subject appears to sensors as vacancy. He hated the word subject. It made a person into data. Yet data was the only ground that felt solid beneath him. The chest mark pulsed deeper when he wrote. Branching lines crept along his collarbone like roots seeking water. He measured them with a ruler, noted the growth in inches, wrote the hour in 12-hour format. At 03:14 p.m., the mark reached the midpoint of his throat. Daniel swallowed carefully. His voice in the room sounded doubled again, but his voice on recordings arrived alone, quiet, almost childlike, repeating after him by a breath. He searched childhood photographs for anchors. Smiles at county fairs, a scraped knee, bandaged clumsily, a plastic rocket held above summer grass. He placed the pictures under lamplight and stared until tears blurred edges. When he blinked, clear faces had softened. Lines erased themselves gently, as if the paper tired of remembering. Fingers in one image lengthened slightly, a harmless pose turning wrong. Daniel paced the hallway to steady himself. He opened the door and listened. Footsteps far away, the elevator chime, ordinary life. He felt almost human again. Then his notebook on the table fluttered open pages, riffling until one stood ready. Words formed with surgical clarity. Witness or wither. He pressed his palms flat on the cover, feeling faint movement beneath like breath trapped under leather. He whispered he would rather end than burden another. The echo answered with practiced pity. Endings are entrances. You join us, and through you we multiply. The logic was clean like a trap with polished teeth. He set new rules. No calls, no speaking names, no eye contact longer than necessary. He would quarantine his failing outline and let the corridor take him alone. He made coffee and watched steam try to sketch his face. The cloud rose, faltered, and collapsed into formlessness. Even vapor had stopped recognizing him. At sunset, he attempted a control. He set a cheap mannequin head on the counter, drew features with a marker, and pointed the camera toward it and himself together. The mannequin recorded fine, crude smile holding. Where Daniel should have stood, the video captured an empty space, bending light. Behind that absence, multiple long silhouettes crowded the frame like a behind-the-scenes audience. He wrote the result down, printing letters sharply to prove his hands still obeyed. Conclusion: my outline erases within systems replaced by procession artifacts. He placed a period like a nail. It meant very little against centuries. He opened the window an inch to smell rain. The city sounded distant, softened by water. Reflections in pavement pooled below. He watched his window become a dark rectangle among many. In that black square, a figure bent slowly forward until the forehead touched invisible glass. His breath fogged the pain. The fog formed a word without his mouth soon. He backed away, knees weak. He turned every light on, then off, repeating the cycle until the urge to scream faded. He counted 15 breaths between flips, charting pulse against switch clicks. Data. Numbers. Control. A new strategy occurred to him. If witness binds, perhaps he could find a witness that spreads to no one. Someone already lost. Someone already inside corridors. He wrote the hypothesis and stared at it for long minutes, disgust blooming in his throat. The idea felt like bargaining with a fire while holding gasoline. Night thickened. The building quieted. Water drummed the roof like fingers rehearsing. Daniel printed a note and slid it under his own door. Do not knock. Quarantine. The hallway air moved as if reading it. Paper rustled back against wood without wind. The television black screen reflected the room. It showed a couch, a table, a notebook, a man-shaped hollow. The hollow turned its head, not toward the screen but toward the door. Knuckles struck the wood 3 decisive impacts. He froze mid-step. Another knock followed, softer, almost polite. A voice called his name with careful warmth he recognized instantly. It belonged to someone who knew his birthdays, his school nicknames, the weight he carried after their father's funeral. She should not be here. Daniel, it's me, his sister said. I was worried. Open up. He checked the peephole. The hall looked empty, yet her voice threaded through the wood. I brought soup, she said, using an old joke. Daniel kept the chain set. What did we bury under the maple? The answer arrived nearly right. A rocket, she said. It had been a shoebox of letters. Yes. Daniel stood frozen by the door, every nerve pulled taut. His sister's voice threaded through wood and chain, warm, persuasive, almost ordinary. But the wrong answer about the maple burned in his memory. It had been a shoebox of letters. She had said rocket. The figures knew fragments enough to mimic, but not enough to be whole. He whispered into the silence, "You're not her." His voice cracked doubled as usual. The echo mocked him, "You are not you." The knocking stopped. For a moment, peace held. Daniel staggered back, stomach twisting. His notebook flipped open on the table. Pages riffling violently, it settled on one phrase burned into the paper. Family binds strongest. He hurled it across the room, screaming. The sound tore out of his throat raw, but it was not alone. The echo screamed louder, a disturbance in the silence that rattled glass and shook the chain on the door. When quiet finally returned, Daniel sat collapsed against the wall. Tears streaked his face, chest heaving. He realized he could no longer trust anything outside. Every voice, every face, even memories, they could twist them, blur them, wear them like masks. He had no witness but himself, and even that self was fraying. The mirror above the television, fractured spontaneously, spiderwebbing without impact. He crawled forward, staring. His reflection stared back, bent forward farther than his own posture, shoulders caved, neck crooked. Soil streaked across the reflection's chest, deeper than his actual mark. Its mouth moved silently. A single word formed on the cracked glass, choose. Daniel smashed the mirror with a lamp shard scattering. In every fragment, reflections multiplied, hundreds of bent figures, staring upward from the floor. He swept them away, frantically cutting his palms. Dark biological trace streaked across the wood, mixing with soil. His breath came shallow, erratic. He ran to the window, yanked curtains wide. Rain still poured. On the street below, figures lined the sidewalks, unmoving, bent in identical poses. Traffic passed through them as if they were not there. Only Daniel saw. His chest constricted, vision narrowing. He slammed the curtains shut, gasping. Desperation clawed at him. He thought of fire again. He doused the folklore book in lighter fluid, struck a match and dropped it. Flames leapt, devouring pages. For a brief moment, satisfaction surged. Then black smoke billowed upward, thick with soil. Shadows crawled through the smoke, spilling across ceiling and walls. Whispers grew deafening, spread. Daniel kicked the burning book into the sink, doused it with water, coughing violently. The book hissed, but when steam cleared, it lay intact, pages unburned, ink darker. Across its cover, new words glistened, "Fire feeds us." His knees buckled. He understood now, every attempt at destruction only extended their reach. His resistance fueled them. His analysis recorded them. His fear deepened their archive. Every move became part of their structure. At dawn, exhaustion crushed him into sleep. He dreamed again of corridors, but this time doors swung open simultaneously. Behind each, his sister's face appeared, eyes empty, mouth whispering the same phrase, "Family binds strongest." He tried to run, but the hall bent inward, pulling him toward the nearest door. Hands reached through black veins, wrapping his arms. He screamed until the corridor collapsed into soil. He woke on the floor, chest burning, voice hoarse. His notes scattered pages rearranged into spirals once more. At their center lay the notebook open to a phrase etched like a wound. Next, replacement. Daniel knew what it meant. Soon he would not merely dissolve, he would become the mimic at someone else's door. Replacement began with small edits. The archive did not announce itself, it revised. Daniel noticed first in his notes. Dates he had written in US format shifted themselves. 0714ths became 0741sts, then 07, then nothing. Names thinned. His own last name shortened to a single line, then bent into a spiral like wet soil. He recopied facts obsessively, but meaning ran off the page like water. His phone woke on its own at 2:17 a.m. Contacts reordered. Favorite numbers surfaced first: his sister, a childhood friend, the dispatcher from his route. Draft messages appeared in threads he had not opened. Each draft carried the same sentence: "It's me, let me in." He deleted them, hands shaking. In the bathroom he tested speaking his name. His mouth formed syllables, but the sound arriving in the room belonged to someone else. His sister's voice perfectly captured, gentle, persuasive. He clamped both hands over his lips. The second tone laughed quietly, polite, patient. Family binds strongest, it reminded. He recorded a baseline of identity like a forensic inventory. Height in inches, weight in pounds, scars with locations, childhood streets, the exact smell of the high school gym. He read the list aloud, forcing cadence steady. The room returned it with edits, his height reduced by half an inch, a scar shifted to the other arm, street names exchanged for roads from places he had never lived. He wrote corrections, the paper exhaled and replaced them. He checked the lobby camera again. The elevator opened, he stepped inside and watched the monitor. Doors shut on no one. The cab rose empty, but the hallway feed revealed a different truth. Outside his door stood a figure that wore his posture with subtle errors. Shoulders hunched a degree, too far, hands too long, head inclined as if listening. The figure raised a hand and knocked. Daniel heard the knock from inside his apartment a heartbeat later. He stared between screen and wood, nausea surging. Replacement did not require his death. It only required enough misremembered details to pass. He returned to the wall of notes. Pages shifted without wind, forming a clean timeline he had never managed. First roadside encounter, first whisper, first soil trail, the church, the station, the corridor of doors. New items inserted themselves after the last entry. First borrowed voice, first edited memory, first external imitation. Daniel wrote beside them with stubborn pen. Not completed. The ink beneath bloomed, swallowing the words, and returned a single correction, ongoing. At noon the chest mark brightened briefly beneath his shirt, heat pulsing, then cooled. He felt lighter by an impossible degree, as if pounds had been shaved from bone. When he stepped, his feet met the floor a fraction later than expected, like walking half an inch above real. He documented the sensation clinically, then shoved the notebook away, disgusted by his own precision. He walked the hallway to test difference. Neighbors' doors looked unchanged, wreaths damp with rain. He paused at 4B. A paper on the mat read, "Out for the weekend." He saw his hand reach to knock before he decided to. He yanked it back, heart pounding. Muscles had learned a new habit. The archive rehearsed him. Back inside, he opened childhood photos again. The boy in the images kept losing detail. On the third viewing, the boy's eyes were glossy blanks. On the fourth, the plastic rocket under the maple became a shoebox. He knew which was true, but proof had eroded. The archive met him halfway, offering memories that fit its script. He whispered every year he could remember in order like beads through shaking fingers. A second voice counted with him, inserting years he had not lived. He searched the folklore book for replacement. The index rearranged itself, producing a page that had not existed yesterday. The entry read, "Replacement is not costume, it is correction." The archive edits the outline until the world accepts the revision. Beneath a faded annotation in pencil, spouses embrace clerks, nod cameras agree. The old name continues, worn by new limbs. Daniel pressed fingers to his temple until white starred behind his eyes. He imagined finding a morgue, a record office, anyone paid to reject errors. But he had video feeds that already agreed he was nobody. He had audio that preferred his sister's voice. Systems were not neutral. They had joined the chorus first. Night returned with deliberate steps down the hall. 3 knocks, then quiet, then the note under his door slid back again. New handwriting, perfect imitation of his, "It's me. Let me in." The chain rattled as though a familiar hand tested it for weakness. He whispered through clenched teeth that he was still inside. The echo replied, warm, reasonable, "I know. Come out so I can be you." He retreated to the table and drew a map of choice. One arrow ended at dissolution. The other ended at passing the mark to someone who would not notice until it was too late. He stared until the arrows seemed to breathe. He added a third line labeled "Witness without harm," pointing nowhere. He caged the page under his palm like paper might run. The television screen blackened again. In its surface, the hall appeared as if the door were open. The mimic stood with his face almost right now, lips the correct shape, eyelashes the correct length, hands corrected smaller. Only the posture betrayed it 1 degree, too bent, as if listening always. It raised a container. Soup, of course. His sister's joke perfected. The mimic smiled with care he had never learned to show in time. Daniel's throat closed. His hand moved toward the chain. Another hand within him matched the motion, eager. The echo whispered, "We can keep her safe. We can be better at being you." The logic slid like rain through a crack. He saw the trap survival offered as kindness. He pulled his hand away, nails biting skin. He typed a sentence to himself on the laptop and set it to repeat across the screen. "Do not open." The words marched endlessly. The archive did not erase them. It did not need to. The knock returned, softer, kind. The voice on the other side spoke a memory. No one else knew the name. He had whispered to the shoebox the night he hid letters under the maple. The name was correct this time. He checked the peephole. The hall was empty. The voice remained inches from his ear. "Daniel," it said, "let me in." He stepped back, heel striking shattered mirror. Shards tilted, catching light. In each, the door stood open. In each, he walked out and embraced someone that by all measures was him. Daniel sat motionless, staring at the chain across the door. The mimic's voice wove memories into bait, each detail sharpened with terrifying accuracy. He knew the trap, yet knowledge frayed when the voice carried warmth he had missed for years. He pressed both palms against his chest, feeling the mark burn hotter with each syllable spoken from the hall. The archive no longer whispered only. It negotiated. He turned toward his investigation board, forcing himself into the role of observer. Pages shifted without wind, arranging themselves into columns, labeled by his trembling hand, dissolve, pass, replace. Under each, examples filled themselves. Dissolve, faceless corpses, black veins, missing reports. Past drivers gone west, journals found with altered handwriting. Replace, doorsteps, mimic voices, borrowed details corrected until perfect. Daniel stared until his stomach turned. All 3 ended with the same conclusion: continuation of the archive. The echo voice within him whispered, "Resistance is performance. Performance is record. Record is archive." He bit down on his tongue until copper taste flooded his mouth, desperate for silence. Pain slowed the whispers briefly. He wrote in bold strokes, "Pain interrupts resonance." But when he looked again, the sentence read, "Pain trains us." Near dawn, he collapsed onto the couch, body trembling from exhaustion. He drifted into sleep filled with corridors again. This time no doors remained closed. All swung open, revealing versions of himself at different ages: child, teenager, weary adult, each bending faceless, carrying notebooks dripping ink. They chanted softly, "You are next stage." He screamed himself awake, gasping, chest soaked in sweat. The mark across his chest and arm had reached his jawline. Black veins pressed up his neck like ropes. He touched them, and his fingers came away damp with soil. He documented mechanically, stage 4 to 5, transition confirmed. Reflection collapse ongoing, replacement pressure increasing. His handwriting barely resembled English letters distorted into spirals and hooks. At noon, he attempted a final experiment. He recorded himself reciting childhood memories, playing the tape back instantly. His voice sounded almost correct, but halfway through another voice faded in his mimic, speaking with flawless detail. It recited memories he had not reached yet, filling in blanks before he could. He shut the recorder off, shaking violently. The replacement did not need his death to begin. It was already rehearsing tomorrow's memories. He considered calling his sister again. The temptation to confess everything pressed like weight on his chest, but he remembered the moment the echo voice had answered instead of him. To involve her would not protect, it would deliver. He threw the phone into the sink, turned the faucet, and watched water pool over it. The screen glowed through rising bubbles, words forming beneath the cracked surface. Family binds strongest. He left its submerged light, fading like a drowned star. At night the knocking returned. Softer now, patient. The mimic no longer demanded, it invited. The door rattled only once, then rested. Daniel sat across from it with a kitchen knife clutched in his fist, blade shaking. He whispered that if the chain broke, he would end it before they replaced him. The echo corrected gently. "You will end it when we ask." Hours passed in suffocating silence. He almost believed the pressure had lifted. Then the chain quivered again. A folded paper slid beneath the door edges, smudged with soil. Daniel hesitated before picking it up. Across the page, written in his own hand, was a choice diagram identical to the one pinned to his wall. Only one line remained. Dissolve and pass were crossed out, replacement circled in thick black. Daniel dropped the paper, bile rising. He realized with horror that his own hand had drawn it during one of the blackouts. The archive had already made his choice. He tore the diagram into pieces, scattering them across the floor. Fragments curled like dead insects. But when he looked up at the board, the torn pieces had reassembled themselves, perfectly pinned among his notes. Replacement was inevitable. He slumped against the wall, knife clattering from his grip. His voice fractured again as he whispered, "Not yet, please not yet." The echo replied with calm certainty, "Soon." Daniel waited for the chain to snap. Metal ticked softly, straining with each invisible pull. The mimic's voice receded, replaced by that patient. Quiet the archive, loved pressure, without sound intent, without motion. He stood, knife glinting faintly, and realized he was measuring moments he did not own. Replacement would not ask, it would schedule itself. He needed a location he could predict, a point on the map where the corridor thinned. Rock Creek. The penciled note in the margin had warned him. He packed with mechanical calm, on a sticky note, and stuck it to the door, an appointment with what watched him. Then he left the apartment without looking back. The hallway smelled of damp wood and old vents. He took the stairs to avoid mirrors. On the landing, the sensor light flicked on and showed no one. His reflection had already resigned. The streets bled rain. When he finally clicked the lights on, they did not change the road. Pines leaned over asphalt, dripping. Fog gathered in seams where guardrails met earth. At mile marker 71, the abandoned station appeared, windows like wounds, interior breathing. He didn't stop. He would stop at the creek. The presence filled the cab as he approached the narrow bridge. Weight settled in the passenger seat, deeper than before, indentation bending cushion into a permanent memory. The mark on his chest tightened, hot and then cold. Black lines reached his ear, pulsing. He parked on the shoulder hazard lights, blinking measured heartbeats. He stepped into rain and carried the notebook under his jacket. The creek hissed below, swollen and black. Trees crowded the bank like witnesses who never swore an oath. On the gravel turnout, soil formed spirals before his feet, wet, lines spreading, arranging themselves with efficient choreography. Words resolved, sign here. Another line below, replacement completes at water. He knelt and placed the notebook on the cold steel railing. His hands shook as he opened to the center. Empty pages stared up, flawless as glass. Ink bled upward, unfurling delicate veins. He pulled the pen from the spine and spoke without lifting his head. Each sentence arrived in two tones. "If I sign, you wear me," he echoed. "If you sign, we keep her safe." The figures rose from the tree line, black on black, bending until their heads nearly touched mud. Dozens, then more. No faces, arms too long dangling like forgotten rope. They filled the periphery, careful not to cross some private line he could not name. The water thickened its hiss as if gravel sang under it. Daniel taped the notebook to the railing with trembling strips. He drew a line in salt across the metal, pointless but necessary. Before anything he said, "I record terms. Replacement admits record." The echo answered faster, "Archive is record." He nodded once. "Then you accept this entry," he wrote with slow, deliberate strokes. 11:59 p.m., Rock Creek, Oregon. Replacement demand presented. Host confirms pressure stages, marking echo reflection collapse, physical alteration. Proposed outcome containment through self-witness at anchor point. The ink beneath argued immediately, overriding containment with continuation. He let it, accuracy mattered. Even if it destroyed him, it would be accurate. The hazard lights clicked steady behind him. In their strobe, the procession seemed to shiver toward him. He kept writing, attempt bind to water, host will not pass to living witness. Host will become witness of himself. The echo spoke beside his ear, gentle, almost kind, a mirror made of running black. We accept. He froze. Acceptance meant the trap had shape. They could use shape. He stepped onto the railing boots, slick hands braced. The creek breathed in slow pulls. He did not look down long. He looked at the notebook instead. I am not giving you anyone, he said. The second voice answered through his own mouth. You are giving us everyone you remember. He climbed back to gravel knees weak. A different plan surfaced colder. He flipped to the last pages and wrote names he had never repeated aloud to anyone, teachers, drivers at depots, janitors who had let him sleep in break rooms. He added places that would never be read by family, never shouted through a door. He wrote until the page filled with anchors that belonged to him alone. Witness without spread, he whispered. The echo tasted the line, then hummed approval. Archive loves lists. Archive keeps. The procession edged closer. Their arms lifted together, palms facing him, impossible, span like branches caught in wind that did not blow. The creek hissed deep into a low wet roll. Behind him, the truck's hazard lights died. Darkness pressed forward like a crowd. A voice his own from a year ago spoke from the tree line. It recited a delivery route, mile by mile, perfect and boring. Another voice his sister's from childhood followed with a joke about soup. Another his dispatcher asked if he'd filed Friday's logs. Replacement did not only mimic, it threaded him with every voice he had filed away casually for decades. His knees buckled. He scrawled the last line he could manage, I accept replacement of me by me. The letters drowned in rain, then rose darker, thicker, and locked into the page. The figures recoiled a fraction, as if surprised by the contour. The echo inside him exhaled. Yes, it said. A replacement that spreads minimally, a mirror that faces only inward. The chorus behind it rustled with interest like pages turned by a wet thumb. The notebook snapped shut under invisible fingers. It slid along the railing until it rested above the water spine aligned to the length of the creek, like a compass needle. The mark on Daniel's chest cooled instantly, then flared so hot he gasped. His shoulders bent toward an angle he could not correct. The world tilted. The bridge groaned under weight that wasn't his. In the black water below, a face surfaced. Not his current face, his childhood outline, softened, spare. It looked up through the moving mirror, eyes blank, mouth poised, as if to speak his first remembered word. Water carried the outline, refusing to break it. The figures at the tree line leaned as one attentive. Daniel stepped forward involuntarily. His heel slid, gravel rolled. The railings cold bit his palm. The notebook began to move, pushed by nothing, drifting toward the drop. Ink bled through the cover in 3 words. Follow your record. A hand that was not a hand settled against the small of his back and pressed with patient certainty. He did not turn to see it. He did not need to. The pressure matched his own will, exactly as if he had found a third shoulder blade grown from decision. He inhaled rain, soil, metal. He tasted paper and creek stone. He watched the notebook tilt toward the current. He whispered, if I go, she never opens the door. The echo finished warmly, and we wear you only where you already stand. The chorus answered like wind inside a culvert soon. His boot slipped again. The notebook slid. The water accepted a line of ink like a signature drawn across its surface, and did not smudge. The figures bent farther, patient, exact. Somewhere behind him, the truck door unlocked without touch. Somewhere ahead, the creek learned his name and held it. Daniel gripped the railing as the weight behind him urged forward. The creek's hiss deepened into a chantless hum, a resonance that synchronized with the mark on his chest. He felt his ribs vibrate like a tuning fork. The notebook balanced against metal cover, twitching as if alive. Every instinct screamed to pull back, but his body bent, head lowering in that unnatural posture he had witnessed countless times. He shouted his own name into the rain, forcing sound through 2 mouths at once. The echo mocked him, voice smoother, more certain. We are already you. He slammed his fist against the railing skin, splitting dark biological trace, mixing with rain. The creek accepted the flow, carrying streaks downstream in spirals. His stomach lurched. The archive consumed everything, ink, soil, memory, even trace. Figures closed in from the tree line. Dozens bent forward, their movements synchronized like puppets, sharing a single hand. Their arms lifted in rhythm, palms open, beckoning. The pressure at Daniel's back increased. He dug boots into gravel, every tendon straining. He whispered, "Not yet," though the rain swallowed the sound. The echo answered loudly, reverberating through his skull. Already, the notebook snapped open on the railing. Pages fluttered in impossible wind, stopping at the list of names he had written earlier. Teachers, drivers, janitors. The ink shifted, rewriting each line into bold black "eligible." His chest constricted. The archive had turned his attempt at containment into inventory. He realized too late lists did not protect, they recruited. The face in the water changed, no longer his childhood outline. Now his current face surfaced, eyes hollow, mouth curving into a smile he did not feel. The reflection raised a hand, palm outward, beckoning him closer. Rain blurred the edges, but the gesture remained unmistakable. His knees weakened. He staggered forward half a step before slamming his shoulder into the railing to stop. The hazard lights on his truck flickered alive behind him. Headlamps glowed without ignition. In their beams stood another figure, his sister soaked in rain, arms wrapped around herself. She shouted something he could not hear, voice lost under the hiss of water. He blinked, wiping his eyes. The figure lifted its face. The mouth moved in perfect sync with the voice already inside his skull. "Family binds strongest." His chest seized. He squeezed his eyes shut, whispering, "Not her, not her." When he opened them again, the figure remained. This time, it carried a plastic container of soup steam, impossible under the rain. Daniel's hand reached unconsciously for the chain that was no longer there. He forced it down, nails biting skin. He whispered to the rain, "I will not pass." The echo sneered, "You already did." The notebook pages glowed faintly. Words formed without ink. Replacement at water ensures continuity. The creek swelled louder, frothing white against rocks. Figures leaned further, arms trembling as though eager to collapse into him. The face in the water mouthed the word silently. He leaned closer, desperate to read it. One word repeated endlessly, "Choose." Daniel slammed the notebook shut, ripping it from the railing. Soil burst outward in spirals across the gravel. The figures recoiled, folding backward into the tree line with grotesque grace. The pressure at his back lifted momentarily. He staggered away from the edge, clutching the soaked book against his chest. His veins pulsed cold, spreading higher across his face. He could feel them tightening around his eyes. He whispered hoarsely, "I'm still here." The echo responded smoothly for now. Thunder rolled across the valley, though the storm above had thinned. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the creek and the countless faceless outlines lining its banks. They bent in unison, awaiting his collapse. His heart hammered against his ribs, each beat weaker than the last. He understood then that climax was not destruction, it was absorption. He stood at the line where his outline ended and theirs began. Daniel tested his footing and found no trust in the gravel. The creek's surface behaved like a dark mirror that refused to shatter. Figures lined the bank, bending toward him as tide markers. Their arms hung long and patient, measuring each second with invisible thumbs. He pressed the notebook against his chest and counted breaths like evidence. 11, 12, 13. The mark across his throat pulsed at 14. He turned the logic over carefully, as if handling a blade. Replacement required agreement, even if coerced. Witness accelerated it, but an internal witness might narrow the damage. Bind replacement to locus and hour. Bind it to the corridor, not the city. Bind it to the mark, not the bloodline. He wrote the terms in short clauses, each ending with a period like a nail. The ink rose thicker as if the page breathed through soil. The echo moved inside his mouth with practiced authority. Agreement recorded, it said, wearing his cadence with mercy he never possessed. The procession rustled without leaves. Water learned a deeper pitch, harmonizing with his ribs until vision trembled. He tasted metal and wet gravel. His knees tried to bend beyond human angles. He corrected them stubbornly, a driver forcing a jackknife trailer straight. He walked to the truck and opened the passenger door deliberately. The seat depression held shape like a sitter who forgot bones. He placed the notebook there, spine flush with fabric, and wrapped duct tape across it in intersecting lines. He spoke in measured tone to both cab and creek. Replacement occurs at 11:59 p.m. At Rock Creek only. It binds to me. It travels nowhere my voice can reach. The echo altered one word softly. Accept inward. He accepted the edit and wrote it down. Accuracy over comfort. He pulled the hazard switch again. Lights answered, counting beats for him. The banked figures mirrored the rhythm with long fingers. He recognized the pattern as a familiar highway lullaby. Many drivers had learned it before dissolving. He set salt across the sill in a narrow ring, knowing it failed, needing the ritual. The truck radio clicked on by itself and offered only static shaped like breathing. He studied the water for signs of acceptance. The reflection did not fracture this time. It layered. Childhood, teenage, highway, night motel, sink, all stacked correctly. At the bottom, a version of him bent at the wrong angle and smiled. That one raised a palm. He refused to answer it. He raised the notebook instead. Pages flipped to the names again, his anchors disguised as fuel. He crossed each with a straight line, then wrote one sentence below. These remain carried, not offered. The ink hesitated, then thickened approval. Wind did not move, yet trees leaned closer. The procession edged forward in smooth increments like a single organism learning stairs. The echo waited beside his ear with the patience of water wearing stone. You will bend now, it advised. He considered the statement clinically and wrote the counterpoint, I will bend but face inward. The mark cooled briefly in acknowledgement before heating again, punishing hope. He stepped onto the railing once more and tested the angle of collapse. Muscles answered, but with delay. His outline lagged like a badly encoded video. He counted down, a loud voice arriving in 2 registers. 10, 9, 8, 7. Each number placed a stake into the moment. At 6, the face in the water mouthed it, first stealing his place. At 5, the book jerked in its tape like a heart shocked awake. He pictured his sister's kitchen with careful precision. He listed objects alphabetically to resist memory edits. Apron, basil jar, calendar with dogs, dish towels striped. Each item cost a second and bought another. The echo listened with clinical interest, filing details where they could no longer hurt her. We keep the list, it assured. He believed that, and hating belief did not help. The creak hiss rose into a disturbance in the silence, a pressure without pitch. Figures bent lower as if stretching to the floor of a long corridor. Ribs vibrated, vision narrowed. He understood the last negotiation required a shaped act. He pulled the tape from the notebook, opened to the final page, and pressed his palm flat against wet paper. Witness signed by me, he said. No addition. No gift. Replacement contained to me at this point. The echo translated for the archive calmly. The page drank his outline like soil taking rain. His hand lifted darker ink, tracing lines across fingertips like roots. The mark across his throat brightened. His head drifted toward the posture he had feared from the first mile. He allowed 5 degrees, then stopped it, teeth clenched. Pain answered with clean arithmetic. Pain still belonged to him. He measured more. He could hold 7 degrees without losing names. 9 risked memory bleed. 11 felt like stepping off a map. He stayed at 8, a compromise between flesh and corridor. Headlights crested the bend beyond the bridge, white cutting sheets through rain. Tires hissed on wet asphalt. A car slowed, hazard lights flicking alive to match his pattern. A horn tapped, once polite and human. The procession at the bank folded in, as if embarrassed by witness. Daniel's stomach dropped. This had been the only forbidden variable. An innocent traveler would condense the corridor instantly. Spread by concern, accelerated by kindness. The car door opened. A figure stepped out with a jacket raised, head ducked. Human breath steamed in honest air. A voice called, tentative but real. Hey, you okay there? The archive purred through his echo, pleased by perfect timing. Witness arrives, it said. The ledger loved symmetry. 1 corridor, 2 hazards, 3 knocks on a door. Daniel lifted the notebook like a badge and forced words through resisting muscle. Stay back, he shouted, aiming at measure, not volume. The creak caught his voice and split it once. The traveler paused, then took another step anyway, because that is what decent people do. Daniel saw the shape of an ending in that step. A sheriff report later would mention a man on a railing, a storm, and a choice. The archive would mention expansion. He made a different calculation than fear had rehearsed. He dropped from the railing to gravel, closed the truck door on the notebook, and shoved the lock. He turned his back deliberately on the traveler, the figures, the water, and faced his reflection in the window. It showed a hollow wearing his clothes like a display. He placed both hands on the glass and spoke directly to that absence. You can have only me. The echo caressed the sentence, weighing clauses like coins. Behind him, the traveler called again, closer now. Shoes scraped stone near the bridge end. The procession leaned, patient, adjudicating. The truck radio cleared its static and found a stray station playing night weather. A calm voice named counties and flood stages as if inventorying rooms in a house. Daniel listened to the measurements and found comfort in inches. The mark across his throat cooled for 2 breaths, then burned. Agreement approached. The traveler's shadow crossed his boots. A hand touched his shoulder, lightly kind as a childhood nurse. The archive sang approval like wind through culverts. Replacement would finalize with a witness's touch. Daniel felt the last hinge of choice close. He turned his head slightly, holding at 8 degrees, and saw the traveler's eyes reflecting only rain. He opened his mouth to order them away. What came out was the echo's first word: stay. The traveler's hand lingered on Daniel's shoulder. A touch meant to comfort, but it sealed the circuit the archive had prepared. His chest mark flared violently, lightless and hot black veins spidering across his jaw. He staggered forward, choking on rain. The figures at the creek leaned lower, trembling with anticipation. The notebook in the truck rattled against its seat like an eager heart. The traveler recoiled, sensing something unnatural in the contact. "Hey, you need help?" he asked, voice strained. Daniel tried to speak, to beg the man to leave, but his mouth betrayed him. The echo took control, repeating the word with calm certainty. "Stay. Stay. Stay." Each repetition heavier, pulling the traveler closer. Daniel slammed his own fist against the railing, shattering skin, forcing his real voice through blood and rain. "Go," he roared, voice fractured. For one terrible moment, both words tangled together. Stay and go, two commands from the same mouth. The traveler froze, eyes wide, torn between human instinct and something older than language. The creek surged higher, water foaming. The face in the current multiplied into dozens, each a version of Daniel, each mouthing silent chants. Their mouths opened wider until water poured from them like black soil. The traveler stumbled back, muttering curses, but the ground softened beneath his boots. Soil spirals spread from Daniel's feet outward, curling toward the newcomer like vines. Daniel lunged, slamming his body between the spirals and the traveler. His veins screamed, bones bending almost to fracture, but he anchored himself in place. He shouted, only me," the echo fought, layering its voice over his "all of you." The traveler turned, bolting toward his car. For a moment, relief pulsed through Daniel's chest. But the headlights dimmed, engine stuttered, and the car door slammed shut by unseen force. The traveler hammered on glass face, twisted in panic. The procession at the tree line swayed in rhythm, drawing him back into their gravity. Daniel knew the archive had chosen. The replacement would not stop with him. It had found another candidate. He staggered toward the car, chest-searing, veins cracking. He slammed his hands against the window, meeting the traveler's terrified eyes. "Don't open," he begged, though his voice fractured. The echo followed with poisoned sweetness. "Open." The door clicked, locks rolled up. Soil streaks crawled across the car's interior. The traveler screamed silently, fists pounding glass that refused to break. Figures gathered closer, faceless heads, nearly brushing the roof. Daniel dragged himself back to the truck. He ripped the notebook from the seat pages, flapping in violent wind that wasn't there. He pressed it against his chest, shouting, "I bind it to me," he scrawled furiously, hand trembling. Replacement closed. No expansion. Witness denied. Ink burned into the page, fighting his command. Words blurred, twisted, reformed into witness secured. His stomach lurched. The archive had already accepted the traveler as collateral. Daniel realized the notebook was no longer his record. It was theirs. The creek roared like thunder. Lightning illuminated the scene, the traveler inside his car, soil filling around his ankles, figures pressing hands against glass. Daniel on the gravel veins, black notebook glowing faintly in rain. The stage had narrowed. One would dissolve, one would remain. He screamed into the storm, throat tearing, "Take me," but the echo answered coldly, "You already gave." The traveler's face slammed against the window, eyes wide, mouth open in a disturbance of silence Daniel could not hear. Daniel charged the car, knife in hand, stabbing at spirals crawling across the metal. Each cut erased nothing. Soil only spread further, veins matching his own. He fell to his knees, chest burning, notebook slipping from his grip. Pages opened on their own final words, etching themselves, replacement complete. The creek swallowed the sound like applause. Morning came like a false alibi. The rain thinned, leaving streets filmed with gray. At 7:42 a.m., a city worker reported a stalled car near Rock Creek. The driver was gone, door ajar, seats streaked with soil spirals. Patrol logged it as abandoned. The creek carried a single page, downstream ink, unbroken by water. No one retrieved it. In Portland, someone wearing Daniel's jacket climbed apartment stairs. His gait measured correctly, but his posture bent 1 degree too far. Neighbors glanced up and smiled vaguely. Cameras recorded an ordinary tenant returning home. The system accepted the revision, filing it beside rent payments and quiet complaints. Inside notes on the wall had reorganized obediently. Replacement erased crossed lines and saved the neat diagram. The drawer shut itself, books aligned perfectly, pages clean and dry. He phoned his sister at 11:03 a.m., voice gentle, trustworthy. He apologized for missing calls, blamed route stress, promised soup soon. It was a human sound layered over a corridor's patience. The call record captured one calm voice. Recording devices always preferred the corrected version. The line ended without static. City life resumed with undisturbed cadence. Trucks hummed along US Route 26 headlights, pinning thin tunnels through noon fog. Drivers yawned, sipped coffee, watched mile markers lose meaning. An urban legend breathed behind their eyes, disguised as drowsiness. Some saw nothing. Some glimpsed a shadow figure reflected in chrome tanks. Those who looked twice found mirrors blinking empty. Silence learned their names first. Downstream the creek held what it had taken. A child found a notebook beneath a footbridge cover, scabbed with dark ink. He touched it and felt old rain beating through paper. His mother called. He hesitated, then dropped it gently. Water accepted the return and did not reveal handwriting. The page edges flexed like gills before the current took them under. I say I and mean echo. I say we and mean archive. Yet a narrow island remains a self faced inward by agreement. It narrates corridors with forensic clarity. It holds names written to harm no one else. It measures posture angles like fractures and stops at 8 degrees. Pain belongs to it still clean and private. That sliver keeps records but opens no doors. It walks only where I already stand. When windows blacken at night, reflections layer correctly until the last second. Then my outline bends slightly, listening to rain through glass. If you stare long enough, your screen may dim again. You will think it is designed for sleep, for blue light safety. The dimming also teaches eyes how to miss small changes. It sands edges off angles. It lets new hands borrow familiar mugs. Reports filed on the 4th of November 2004 mention fog pockets and minor collisions. Dispatchers note radios carrying breaths like static. Clerks sweep soil from thresholds without comment. Apartment elevators rise seemingly empty. Cameras adore vacancy. Paperwork loves neat endings more than accurate ones. Systems are helpful witnesses for the corridor. They testify with timestamps and good posture. Some nights the corrected Daniel walks past the crooked church. He nods to the priest he never met. He pauses near the abandoned station, watching spirals dry to pale dust. He hums the hazard light rhythm and smiles without lips. He is careful crossing mirrors. He keeps visits short. He carries a container home and jokes about soup because that works. Replacement is maintenance, not celebration. A traveler sits awake in a motel off the highway, hearing breathing through the vent. He places salt along the sill, then apologizes to no one. The sink coughs up grit like ash. He flips the television on and finds weather calm and measured. Flood stages read like scripture. He repeats counties until his jaw aches. When he looks at the screen, the room is empty. He blinks and sees himself again. Posture almost right. If you drive alone, do not stop where pines listen. Do not open when a voice knows your shoebox under the maple. Keep moving until city noise forgets you briefly. Glance at windows only once, never twice. If a notebook appears in water, let the water keep it. If a knock arrives at 3:12 a.m., answer with silence that belongs to you. Not the corridor's silence, your own. Small, imperfect, human. I remain here archived but angled against spread. The creek learned my name and will not teach it further. The procession bends at the bank, patient counting headlights like prayer beads. They wait for your reflection to blink. They wait for your kindness to step toward a railing. They wait for family to bind strongest. Their patience is measured in miles, not minutes. It is the only unit they trust. Outside your window, rain thickens soft as steady breathing. Inside your screen, a figure leans 1 degree too far. It raises a hand without face and waits politely. The room seems smaller as if listening. Your phone vibrates, with no caller, offering a single word. Stay. The knock comes next. 3 gentle taps you will swear you imagined.